Welcome to Anonna's creation. Tonight, and for many nights to follow, we journey back. Not just in time, but to the very foundation of our world, to an age before history, when the cosmos was new, scarred, and violent. We are telling the story of Prometheus. The name echoes with fire, with rebellion, and with suffering. But before the fire, before the punishment that defines him, there was the silence. There was the cold. There was the mud. Our story begins in the immediate, heavy stillness after the greatest war the universe would ever know, the Titanomachy. The 10-year war. The universe had a new master. The Titans, those ancient, chaotic forces of nature, had been defeated. Their reign, a time of raw power and unpredictable rage, was shattered. The victors, the younger, sharper, more organized Olympians, had claimed the heavens. From the peak of Mount Olympus, a peak that now scraped the roof of the sky, Zeus reigned supreme. He was not a gentle king. He was a warden. He was a chief executive who had just completed the ultimate hostile takeover. The cosmos answered to him, and the price of stability was fear. The lightning bolt was not just his weapon, it was his signature on every decree, the constant, crackling reminder of who held the power. The defeated Titans were dealt with brutally. Most were hurled into Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld, a cosmic prison locked with gates of bronze. But not all Titans had fought against Zeus. One, in particular, had been the key to the Olympian victory. His name was Prometheus. His name means forethought. He alone saw the future. He knew his fellow Titans, for all their strength, were creatures of impulse. They were the past. Zeus, organized and strategic, was the future. Prometheus and his slower-witted brother, Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, had defected. They provided the strategy, the intelligence that the Olympians needed to tip the scales. And so, Prometheus was rewarded. He was given freedom. He was allowed to walk the halls of Olympus. But freedom is not the same as belonging. Prometheus was an alien in the gleaming courts of the victors. The other gods, Apollo, radiant and arrogant, Hera, calculating and proud, Ares, bloody and simplistic, they tolerated him. He was the turncoat uncle, the intellectual who had betrayed his own kind for the winning side. Zeus respected his mind, but he did not trust him. How can you ever truly trust the one who taught you how to win a revolution? You always know they are capable of starting another one. While the Olympians reveled in their new power, holding feasts that shook the mountain, Prometheus walked. He walked the empty, scarred landscapes of the earth. The war had devastated the mortal plane. The world was ash and stone, washed clean by floods and scorched by divine fire. The air was thin and cold. There were beasts, yes. Great lions stalked the plains, and eagles ruled the air. The oceans teemed with life. Nature, left to itself, was strong. But the world felt incomplete. It was a magnificent stage without an actor. A palace without a resident. The gods had no interest in the dirt below. To them, the earth was a footstool. A resource. They raced their chariots across the sky, they drank nectar, and they argued. They were divine, which meant they were complete. They needed nothing. Prometheus was different. Because he was forethought, he was defined not by what was, but by what could be. And when he looked at the empty valleys and silent riverbanks, he felt an ache. A profound, cosmic loneliness. One day, he found himself walking in the region of Prometheus, by the banks of a wide, muddy river. The clay there was rich, thick, and colored like sunset. The gods had created their celestial forms from pure ether, from light and spirit. The animals had been shaped from the stronger elements of the world. But this clay, it held everything. It held the water of the river and the grit of the mountains. Prometheus stopped. The wind was the only sound. He looked at the eagles soaring above. They had claws to hunt. They had wings to escape. He looked at the lions in the distance. They had fur for warmth and teeth for defense. Every creature was perfectly equipped for its existence. They were finished. He knelt. He pushed his divine hands into the cold, wet earth. He felt the planet's memory in the mud. He remembered the chaos of his father's generation and the cold order of Zeus's rule. One was anarchy. The other was tyranny. There had to be something else. Something in the middle. Something that could choose. He began to sculpt. He did not work quickly. He was forethought. He was deliberate. He did not shape a beast that walked on four legs, looking down at the dirt it came from. He shaped something that stood upright, on two. Something vulnerable. Something balanced precariously between the earth and the sky. He worked for days, or perhaps decades, time moved differently for the immortals. First time, this titan who had seen the outcome of wars felt true despair. He had created a vessel, but he had no soul to put inside it. The world had sound, it had motion, but it did not have a consciousness. This new creation was weak. It had no claws, no thick hide, no protective fur, and no wings. If he gave them life, they would freeze in the night. They would be slaughtered by the beasts before the first sunset. They were incomplete. They were mistakes. Zeus, hearing of this strange hobby, looked down from Olympus and laughed. He saw the mud dolls. "Let the Titan play in the dirt," the king of gods declared. "It keeps his clever mind busy, but let them remain dirt. The world needs no new masters, and it certainly needs no new burdens." Prometheus looked up at the golden peak of Olympus, the source of all power. Then he looked down at the pale, lifeless face of the clay figure at his feet. It was a perfect image of helplessness. He had built the form, but the spark was missing. The spark of the divine. The spark that Zeus kept locked away. The very essence of the gods, the celestial fire. Prometheus set his jaw. Zeus had declared the earth to be a finished project. Prometheus looked at his clay children and knew, with absolute certainty, that the work had only just begun. Prometheus knelt, paralyzed. The river had moved on, the sun had shifted, but the sculptor remained frozen by the scale of his failure. Before him stood his creations, an army of drying mud. They were perfectly formed shadows of the divine, built to look at the stars, but they were lifeless. They were nothing but earth, just as Zeus had mockingly decreed. Prometheus, the titan of forethought, who had seen the outcome of the Great War, had failed to see this fundamental truth. Creation and animation are two entirely different acts. He could build the vessel, but he could not provide the essence. He could mimic the shape of the gods, but he could not mimic their spirit. His figures, standing silent on the plains, were a testament to his ambition and his impotence. He had wanted something between the chaos of the old titans and the cold tyranny of the Olympians. Instead, he had made only statues. He looked up. Olympus gleamed, an impossible peak of polished marble and eternal light. Zeus possessed the celestial fire, the ether, the very spark of divine consciousness that animated the gods. But Zeus would never share it. He kept the keys to the cosmos tightly gripped, demanding order above all else. To ask him for the spark would be to admit rebellion, and Prometheus knew the punishment for that. He had seen his brother, Atlas, forced to hold the entire sky on his shoulders. Zeus did not offer second chances. If he could not get the spark from the king, perhaps he could get it from the king's daughter. Prometheus was not the only mind on Olympus. There was another who valued strategy over brute force, wisdom over ego. Pallas Athena. She was the goddess of wisdom, of craft, and of the strategy of war. She, alone among the Olympians, had been born directly from the mind of Zeus, emerging fully grown and armored. Because she came from his mind, she understood his logic. But because she was wisdom incarnate, she also understood logic's limitations. While the other gods feasted or pursued their petty dramas, Athena often stood at the battlements of Olympus, looking down on the world her father now ruled. She too saw the emptiness. She saw the perfect calculations of Zeus's new order, but she also saw that it was an order without meaning. Prometheus returned to the gleaming mountain, his heart heavy. He moved through the golden halls not as a guest, but as a ghost. He sought her out, finding her not in the throne room, but in her workshops, where she practiced the craft of weaving, creating complex tapestries that told stories of what was and what could be. He stood in the doorway. Athena did not look up, her hands moving deftly across the loom. "You have been playing in the mud, Titan," she said. Her voice was not mocking, like her father's. It was a statement of fact. "I have built forms," Prometheus corrected, his voice low. "But they are empty. They have no spirit. They are nothing." "They are what my father commanded them to be," Athena replied, her shuttle clicking against the threads. "They are orderly. They are dirt. They cause no trouble." "Is that all there is?" Prometheus pushed, stepping into the light of her workshop. "Order. A universe that runs like a perfect, cold machine. You are wisdom. Tell me, what is the purpose of a perfect design if there is no consciousness to appreciate it? What is the meaning of your tapestry if there is no one to see the story?" Athena finally stopped. She turned, her gray eyes analyzing him. She saw past his deception, past his Titan heritage. She saw the truth of his agony. He was the only being in the cosmos driven by the burden of the future. "What you ask for," she said softly, "is not a gift. It is a theft. You want the soul. You want the divine spark. My father guards this. It is the essence of the gods. To give it to clay, it is the greatest heresy. It is not heresy, Prometheus argued, desperate. It is completion. Look at them. They are built to worship you. The beasts of the field cannot appreciate your wisdom. The lions do not marvel at the strategy of the stars. The eagles do not praise Apollo's sun. They only feel its warmth. I have created something that can know you. They will be your audience. Without them, we are just immortals, trapped in an eternal, pointless feast. You will be wisdom, with no one to teach. He will be Apollo, with no one to inspire. Zeus will be king, with no subjects, only prisoners. The logic struck her. Athena, goddess of strategy, saw the flaw in Zeus's plan. A king with no willing subjects is only a tyrant. A cosmos without consciousness is only a void. She looked at the Titan. He had sided with them in the war. He had ensured their victory. Perhaps he was not just the past. Perhaps he was the only one who truly understood the future. What I give, she warned, cannot be taken back. Consciousness is not just appreciation, Titan. It is pain. It is fear. It is the realization of their own weakness. To be aware is to know suffering. You are creating the only creature in the universe that will know it is going to die. That is a price forethought is willing to pay, Prometheus said. Athena nodded, once. She grabbed her spear, and together, they left the safety of Olympus. They descended to the mortal plane, arriving at the riverbank just as the moon was rising, casting the clay figures in a ghostly, silver light. They stood like a silent, forgotten graveyard. Prometheus watched, holding his breath. He had done the building. The divine act was hers. Athena did not touch the figures. She stood in their center. She lifted her spear and struck the barren earth. Where it hit, there was not a sound of thunder, but a ripple, like a vibration through the soil. She closed her eyes. She did not breathe a physical fire into their mouths. Instead, she released something far more potent and far more subtle. She released a whisper of her own essence. From her, a faint, silvery mist bled into the air. It was the spirit of inquiry, of curiosity, of craft, and of knowledge. But it was diluted, not the full, burning awareness of a god, but just enough. Just enough to be. The mist swirled around the clay figures, entering their nostrils, settling into their hollow chests. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one of the clay figures blinked. Its head turned. Its movements were stiff, like a newborn foal. Its eyes, moments ago dull mud, now held a tiny, terrified spark of light. It saw its own hands, caked in the mud of its own creation. It looked at the other figures as they, too, began to move. They shivered. Prometheus let out a sound, a sob or a laugh, he did not know. They were alive. But Athena's warning was instantly true. The creatures, they were not yet men, not yet humans, just beings, gasped. The night air was cold. They realized they were naked. They realized they were weak. They saw the dark shadows of the trees beyond the riverbank, and they heard the howl of a wolf in the distance. They did not feel gratitude. They felt terror. They huddled together, shivering, confused, helpless. They were alive, and they were miserable. Prometheus, the great Titan, the visionary, the creator, had given them the soul of a god but the body of an animal. He had given them awareness, but no tools to survive it. Athena looked at the shivering mass of new life. They are yours now, Prometheus, she said, her voice heavy with the gravity of their shared crime. You wanted them to be aware. Now, you must teach them how to endure it. She vanished, returning to Olympus before her absence was noted, leaving the Titan alone with his creation. Prometheus looked at the huddled, crying beings, and realized his work was not over. He had given them the spark of life. Now, he had to give them the means of civilization. He had to give them hope. He had to give them fire. Prometheus, the pillar of forethought, the veteran of the divine war, was entirely unprepared for the sound of weeping. His creations, the animated clay, were alive, and they were terrified. They huddled together by the riverbank, a shivering mass of pale earth and stolen spirit. The gift of Athena, consciousness, had descended upon them not as a blessing, but as a curse. They were aware. This meant they were aware of the cold that bit at their naked skin. They were aware of the hunger knotting their stomachs. And they were aware of the dark. When the sun, that great golden chariot of Apollo, dipped below the horizon, a collective panic seized them. They had never experienced a true night. As conscious beings, the withdrawal of light was a personal, terrifying assault. They looked at Prometheus, their eyes wide in the gloom, pleading. But pleading for what? They had no words. They had only the raw, animal sound of fear. This was the dawn of humanity, and it was miserable. Prometheus tried to teach them. He was a god. He knew the secrets of the cosmos. He gathered them and pointed to the sky, attempting to explain the movements of the stars, the great celestial order that Zeus now commanded. They only shivered. Astronomy meant nothing to a creature freezing to death. He tried to teach them organization. He gathered roots and raw plants, showing them what the beasts ate. They ate, and they grew sick. Their bodies were not hardened like the animals. They were soft, vulnerable, unfinished. He tried to build them shelters from branches, but the creatures lacked the strength or the understanding to help. They just watched him, their eyes hollow. The predators came. The great lions and shadow wolves, drawn by this new weak herd that did not run, did not fight, and did not understand the laws of the hunt. Prometheus, the Titan, spent his nights as a shepherd, a sentry. He stood over his flock, a divine scarecrow, radiating an energy that kept the most dangerous beasts at bay. But he could not be everywhere. On the seventh night, a wolf, braver than the others, darted in and snatched one of the smaller, weaker forms. Prometheus heard the scream. It was short. It was the first death. It broke something in the Titan. Athena's warning echoed in his mind. To be aware is to know suffering. He had not just created life. He had invented loss. He had created grief. He looked at the remaining figures, clutching each other, weeping for the one who was gone, and he realized the fundamental flaw in his design. He had given them the soul of a god, but the defenseless body of prey. Meanwhile, on Olympus, the event did not go unnoticed. Zeus looked down. He saw the moving mud dolls. He noted Athena's subtle interference, the faint trace of her divine spirit now polluting the mortal plane. He was irritated, but not yet furious. His authority had been questioned, but not defied. Not openly. He convened the council. "The Titan plays with his toys," Zeus announced, his voice booming like distant thunder, though he sat perfectly still on his throne. "And my daughter has given them sensation. Very well. Let them have it. But this is where it ends." He issued the decree that would shape the destiny of two worlds. "This new creature is an animal," Zeus declared. "It shall remain an animal. They will live under the decree." He was on Earth, watching his experiment die. The nights grew colder. The winds sharpened. The long, biting chill of the planet's first true winter was approaching. These new beings were not adapting. They were simply enduring, and they were fading. They were shadows clinging to life. Prometheus knew they would not survive. Consciousness was too heavy a burden to carry in the dark. Fear was too corrosive. The cold was too absolute. He had tried to teach them like gods. He now realized he must teach them to be men. And to be a man, to be human, meant to defy the natural order. It meant to fight back against the dark. They didn't need knowledge of the stars. They needed to create their own star. A small sun for the cave. They didn't need raw roots. They needed to soften their food, to make it yield sustenance. They needed defense, not from a divine protector, but a tool that they could wield themselves. A spear of light to hold back the wolf at the door. They needed everything that Zeus had just forbidden. Prometheus looked at the shivering creatures huddled at his feet. They looked up at him, their faces streaked with mud and tears, their eyes begging for a salvation they could not even name. His forethought, his great gift, showed him two paths. The first path was obedience. He could watch his creation fail, watch the cold and the predators reclaim the clay, and the earth would return to the stable, silent order that Zeus demanded. He would remain safe on Olympus, the clever Titan who had chosen the winning side. The second path was rebellion. True rebellion. Not a war for power, like the Titanomachy, but a war of ideology. He looked down at his people, then he looked up. He looked past the clouds, past the domain of the eagles, to the gleaming, impossible peak of Olympus. He saw the mountain not as his home, but as a fortress. He saw the forge of Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith, where the lightning bolts of Zeus were hammered into existence. He saw the chariot of Apollo, which dragged the sun across the sky. The fire was there, locked away by the gods, forbidden to mortals. Prometheus, the Titan who had helped build this new order, made his choice. He would break it. He would not let his children freeze in the dark. If Zeus would not give them the means to survive, he would steal it. Prometheus was a prisoner of his own creation. The weeping of humanity was a chain stronger than any forged in Tartarus. The gaze of Zeus, high on his throne, demanded obedience. The Titan was caught between the suffering earth and the tyrannical sky. His choice was made. Now, the architect of victory needed a plan for the perfect crime. He could not remain on Earth. He was a god, and his presence alone kept the worst of the elements at bay. But his protection was passive. It was warmth, not a tool. He had to leave his fragile children huddled in the mouth of a shallow cave, sheltering them with boulders, knowing it was not enough. He ascended Olympus. The journey up the mountain had never felt so cold. Before, he had walked these paths as an ally, a respected consultant, an outsider tolerated for his genius. Now, he walked them as a spy. Every gleam of the polished marble felt like an accusation. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper, carrying his treason to the throne room. Olympus was not just a palace, it was a fortress, the headquarters of the universe's new security state. The great gates were guarded by the Ori, the goddesses of the seasons, who monitored all passage between the divine and mortal realms. Zeus's eagles circled the peaks, their eyes missing nothing. The very air crackled with the energy of the master bolt, the constant, latent threat of the king. Prometheus had to mask his intent. He had to bury his rage, his pity, his desperate anxiety, beneath the calm, analytical mask of forethought. He rejoined the divine court. He listened to Apollo's music and praised the flawless beauty. He watched Ares polish his armor and nodded at his strategies. He observed, he calculated, and he waited. He needed fire. But what fire? He could not steal the lightning of Zeus. That was the source of power itself, held by the king, and to touch it meant instant annihilation. He could not capture the fire of Apollo's sun chariot. That was pure celestial energy, the fire of daylight, too vast and uncontrollable for a mortal hand to wield. He needed a different kind of fire. Not the fire of judgment or the fire of nature. He needed the fire of technology. The fire that builds. The fire that civilization itself is forged in. There was only one place in the cosmos that held such a spark, the great forge of Hephaestus. Hephaestus was the blacksmith god, the craftsman, the divine engineer. Hurled from Olympus as a child, he was the outcast, the lame god, tolerated only because he was useful. He built the thrones, the palaces, and the weapons. Hephaestus alone understood creation not as a whim, but as a labor. His forges were located deep within the volcanic heart of the mountain, a place of soot and sweat and machinery that the other, cleaner gods avoided. Prometheus knew this was his target. He went to the forge, adopting an air of professional curiosity. He found Hephaestus as he always was, pouring his rage and genius into his work. The air was suffocating with heat. Hammers rang against anvils with the rhythm of a captured thunderstorm. Sparks flew like swarms of angry stars. In the center of the workshop burned the eternal flame, a piece of a star that Hephaestus had trapped, the source of all his power. This was the fire that turned raw ore into divine armor, the fire that cooked, the fire that transformed. Titan, Hephaestus grunted, not looking up, sweat gleaming on his massive shoulders. You are far from the polite conversation of the throne room. I came to admire true work, Prometheus said, his voice calm, his eyes scanning every shadow, every tool, every entrance. You are an artist, Hephaestus. The others play. You create. The blacksmith god paused. Flattery from Prometheus was rare and valuable. He grunted, a sound that was almost appreciation. They enjoy the weapon, Hephaestus said, gesturing to a rack of newly finished thunderbolts for Zeus. They do not respect the heat that bends the metal. I respect the heat, Prometheus said softly. He watched. He learned. The fire was guarded, yes, but guarded only by its own intensity. No one would steal it because no one could hold it. Even a god would be incinerated just approaching the core flame. Hephaestus himself used specialized tools, tongs and blast shields forged from cosmic metals. Prometheus knew he could not take such tools without alerting the blacksmith. He needed a container. Something subtle. Something natural. Something that would not be noticed in the halls of Olympus. He left the forge, thanking the smith for his time, his mind racing. He had the location. He needed the vessel. He walked the lower slopes of Olympus, in the borderlands where the divine mountain touched the beginnings of the mortal world. And there, growing wild, he saw it. The giant fennel stalk. To the other gods, it was a weed. A simple plant. But Prometheus, the titan of forethought, saw its true nature. The stalk was thick and sturdy, but dry on the outside. It would not burn quickly. But the inside was a pithy, fibrous core. It was not hollow, but it was soft. It was designed by nature to burn incredibly slowly, to smolder from the inside out, carrying a spark for hours, even days, while the outside remained cool and intact. It was the perfect disguise. A natural thermos for a stolen star. Prometheus ripped one of the tallest stalks from the earth, measuring nearly 10 feet high. He hollowed the core just slightly. It looked like a simple walking stick, something an old titan might lean on. He returned to the upper halls, the stalk in his hand. He attended the evening feast. He listened to the gossip, the boasts, the divine politics. He felt the cold, indifferent gaze of Zeus sweep the room, and he did not flinch. The king saw nothing but a defeated titan, leaning on a stick. Prometheus waited for the hour when Hephaestus would leave his forge to deliver the new weapons to the throne room, the brief window when the workshop would be empty, but the eternal fire would be unattended. The plan was set. The tool was in his hand. He looked across the cosmos from the high windows of the palace, down toward the dark, cold blotch on the planet that was his fragile new species. The first winter was tightening its grip. He was out of time. Tonight, he would rob the gods. The air in the great hall of Olympus was thick with nectar and self-congratulation. Apollo played the lyre, the music so perfect it hurt to listen to, charting the flawless mathematics of the new cosmos. Zeus sat on his throne, his new lightning bolts, polished and deadly, resting at his side. Prometheus sat in the shadows of the colonnade, the giant, dry fennel stalk resting against his shoulder. He watched. He waited. Every note of the music felt like a hammer blow against his strained nerves. His mind was not on Olympus. It was miles below, in a cold cave, where his fragile creations were shivering, dying, their whispered breaths of stolen consciousness fading in the dark. Then, the moment came. The bronze doors of the hall groaned open, and Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, entered. He was covered in soot, limping more heavily than usual, his massive arms carrying a new shield for Hera. He presented it, bowing awkwardly. Zeus, in a rare mood of satisfaction, signaled for the blacksmith to stay. He ordered nectar for the craftsman, a small reward for his labor. Hephaestus, obligated to his king and wary of his mother, Hera, accepted the cup. He stayed. He drank. The forge was unattended. This was the window. Prometheus rose slowly. Every god in the room was focused on Hephaestus, amused by the sight of the dirty craftsman attempting to navigate the elegance of the royal court. No one looked at Prometheus. He was the boring intellectual, the relic. He gripped his fennel stalk, using it like the walking stick of an old man, and slipped from the hall. He did not run. To run on Olympus is to admit guilt. He walked. He moved through the gleaming corridors, each step an echo in the pressurized silence. He passed the chambers of Apollo, the gardens of Hera. He descended the inner stairs toward the volcanic heart of the mountain, the industrial sector the other gods despised. The air grew hot. The scent of ozone and cooling metal filled his lungs. He reached the forge. It was empty, just as he had calculated. But it was not dark. The great central furnace, the eternal fire that Hephaestus had captured from a collapsing star, roared in the center of the room. It was a captive sun, the source of all technology. The heat was a physical wall, a blast of power that seared the air. Even Prometheus, a titan, felt his divine skin tightening, the heat threatening to scour him to ashes. This was a fire not meant for life. It was meant for bending reality. This was the fire Zeus had forbidden. Prometheus knew he had only seconds before his presence was felt, before the very pressure of the forge sent an alarm through the mountain. He gripped the fennel stalk, his walking stick, his hollow vessel. He approached the furnace. The light was blinding. The sound was the roar of the universe being born. He could not steal the flame was too vast. He needed the seed. He needed one single ember. Bracing his entire being against the divine aura of the fire, Prometheus plunged the tip of the giant fennel stalk deep into the fiery heart of the forge. There was a sudden, violent intake of energy. The stalk shuddered in his hands. The pithy core, dry and fibrous, instantly ignited. But just as he'd planned, the dense fiber of the plant did not burst into flame. Instead, it absorbed the spark. It captured the divine energy, holding it in a concentrated, smoldering coal, while the hard, dry exterior of the stalk merely darkened. He pulled it back. The forge roared, unaware of the theft. The eternal fire remained. But Prometheus now held its child. He held the secret of civilization, smoldering silently within a hollow stick. He turned and left the workshop. The heat receded behind him. He began the ascent. This was the most dangerous part of the journey. He could not walk as an old man now. He carried the acceleration of the future. He reached the main halls. The feast was ending. Gods were moving toward their chambers. He had to pass them. He nodded to Hermes, who sped by on an errand, suspecting nothing. He passed Athena. She met his eyes for only a fraction of a second. She knew. She had given the soul. He now held the means. She looked away, granting him his escape, her face pale. He reached the great gates of Olympus, guarded by the Ori. The seasons stood barring his path, their faces impassive. "The hour is late for a walk, Titan," said the goddess of winter. "Forethought never sleeps," Prometheus replied, his voice steady, though the stalk in his hand was now vibrating faintly, the power inside desperate to escape. "I go to contemplate my brother's burden." The goddesses, sensing only the truth of his words, for he was indeed thinking of Atlas and the burden of the world, opened the celestial gates. Prometheus stepped outside the divine boundary. The moment the gates closed behind him, he abandoned all pretense. He ran. He leaped from the peak of Olympus, a controlled fall down the sheer face of the mountain, his titan strength shielding the stalk from the rushing wind. He moved faster than any mortal I could see, a meteor in reverse, falling from heaven to earth. He landed in the mortal realm as the moon reached its zenith. The world was frozen, silent. He ran to the cave. The humans were huddled inside, a pile of shivering misery. They were dying. The spark Athena had given them was guttering out. They saw his great form blocking the moonlight, and they whimpered, expecting only another night of cold terror. Prometheus entered the cave. He had gathered tinder before he left, a pile of the driest leaves and dead branches the frozen world could offer. He laid them in the center of the floor. He raised the giant fennel stalk. With a sharp crack, he snapped it over his knee. The divine spark, freed from its prison, fell from the broken pith. It was not a flame. It was a single, impossibly bright coal, glowing with the heat of its divine origins. It landed on the pile of dry leaves. Nothing happened. The humans stared at the glowing rock. Prometheus knelt. He put his face close to the tinder, and the titan who had defied a god blew. Gently, a puff of divine breath on a mortal leaf. The leaves smoked. The ember glowed brighter, and then, with a sudden joyful whoosh, the tinder ignited. Flame. For the first time on Earth, there was fire. It was not the cold light of the moon or the distant, judgmental light of the stars. It was a living light. It was warmth. The humans cried out, shielding their eyes. Then, slowly, tentatively, they crawled forward. They felt the heat. It did not bite like the ice. It pushed the cold away. They saw the light pushing the shadows into the corners of the cave, defeating the darkness that had haunted them since their birth. Prometheus watched their faces, streaked with dirt and tears, transform. The terror in their eyes, the hollow look of despair, was replaced by something new. It was the first spark of wonder. It was the birth of hope. They held their hands out to the dancing flame, and they smiled. Prometheus, the greatest criminal in the history of the cosmos, leaned against the cave wall and, for the first time, watched his children embrace the light. The fire was born. Humanity, huddled in the cave, stared at the dancing orange light. This new thing was alive. It moved, it breathed, and it spoke, crackling and hissing, telling a story they did not yet understand. They were mesmerized. They were children of mud given the soul of the gods, and now they possessed the fire of the stars. But a gift is not a tool until you know its use. Their fear, which had defined their entire existence, was momentarily forgotten, replaced by intense, burning curiosity. One of the younger humans, bolder than the rest, reached out a tentative hand, fascinated by the moving colors. He screamed. A sharp, piercing cry. He pulled his hand back, staring in disbelief at the red mark, the sudden blistering pain. The others recoiled. This beautiful, warm light was also a weapon. This savior also carried pain. They looked at Prometheus, their eyes filled with confusion. The Titan realized that stealing the fire was only the first step. Giving the gift was easy. Teaching the responsibility of power was the true labor. Prometheus, the architect of the cosmos, became the first teacher. He stepped forward. He did not reprimand the injured human. He merely motioned for him to sit. Then, Prometheus picked up a long, dead branch, demonstrating how to feed the new creature in the center of the floor. He laid the wood on the embers, and the humans gasped as the fire leaped up, stronger now, embracing the offering. "This," Prometheus said, and his voice, though divine, was slow and deliberate, forming the root of their new language. "This is yours. But it must be fed. It must be respected. It will die if you starve it, and it will devour you if you unleash it." He established the first human law: the fire must never go out. He organized them. He created the first social role. He designated keepers of the flame. Their duty, the first human duty, was to ensure the heart of their tribe never died. The benefits were immediate. The cave, which had been a freezing tomb, was now a home. It was bright. It was warm. The cold that had seeped into their very bones was pushed back. But the darkness outside the cave remained, and the sounds of the predators returned. The wolves and the great cats, drawn by the strange new light, crept closer. Their eyes gleamed in the shadows just beyond the entrance. The humans huddled back, their old terror returning. Prometheus picked up a thick branch, pushed one end into the fire until it caught, and created the first torch. He walked to the mouth of the cave. A massive shadow lion, drawn by the scent of this weak herd, was preparing to charge. Prometheus thrust the torch forward. The beast, the apex predator of the dark world, roared, not in aggression, but in pure terror. It knew the sun, and it knew the lightning. This was something different, an earthly sun that smelled of smoke and rage. The lion turned, panicked, and fled into the night. The circling wolves vanished. A new sound filled the cave. The humans were cheering. It was a strange, rough noise, but it was the sound of victory. For the first time since their creation, they were not prey. The fire was not just warmth, it was a shield. It was power. But they were still starving. The raw roots they chewed were bitter. Prometheus took one of the spat-out roots from the floor. He sharpened a stick, skewered the vegetable, and held it over the coals. A new smell filled the air. Not the smell of divine nectar, not the smell of ozone. The smell of cooking. He gave the softened root to the human who had burned his hand. The man ate it tentatively, then his eyes widened. The bitterness was gone. It was warm. It was sweet. It gave him strength. This changed everything. They brought him the raw meat they had scavenged from predator kills, meat their weak stomachs could not digest. He showed them how to roast it. The fire unlocked the energy, the protein, the very essence of the food. They ate, and for the first time, they felt true strength flooding their limbs. This single act would allow their brains to grow, their bodies to strengthen. The lessons accelerated. Prometheus, recalling the forge of his enemy Hephaestus, entered a fever of creation. He showed them that the fire was more than defense, more than a kitchen. It was a tool of industry. He took the long sticks they gathered and showed them how to harden the points in the embers, cooling them, sharpening them on the stone. He created the fire-hardened spear. They were no longer just defenders, they were hunters. He took the wet, useless clay from the riverbank, the very clay they were made from. He showed them how to shape it into bowls and cups. Then, he showed them how to place the wet clay near the fire, drying it, baking it, hardening it into the first pottery. They could now carry water. They could store food. In the space of days, humanity leaped millennia. They were no longer shivering, terrified animals, waiting for death in a cold cave. They were a tribe, and in the long nights, kept safe and warm by their stolen star, they gathered around the light. The darkness was no longer a terror, but a canvas. And Prometheus, their father, their teacher, their criminal savior, began to tell them stories. He taught them names for the stars they no longer feared. He taught them the names of the gods they must respect, and the name of the one god who had forbidden their very existence. They moved with purpose. They built. They learned. They laughed. Prometheus watched his children thrive, and his heart was full. But his great gift, his forethought, was also his torment. He looked outside the cave. The fire that kept them alive, the fire that cooked their food, the fire that hardened their spears, produced a byproduct. A thin column of gray smoke was rising from the mouth of the cave. It twisted, climbing, rising higher than the mountains, ascending past the realm of the eagles, past the clouds. It was a signal that could not be missed. A plume of smoke rising from a world that was supposed to be cold, dark, and obedient. It was a sign of industry. It was a confession. It was a finger of ash, pointing directly at the throne of Zeus. Prometheus watched the smoke rise, and he knew his borrowed time was over. On Olympus, there is no weather. There is only perfection. The air is always clear, the light is always golden, and the order is absolute. Zeus sat on his great throne, secure in the knowledge that the universe finally worked. The Titan War was a fading memory. The cosmos was balanced. The gods ruled. The beasts roamed the earth. And humanity, the failed mud experiment, was freezing quietly in the dark, just as he had decreed. His order was stable, predictable, and eternal. Then, he smelled it. It was faint at first, carried on the highest celestial winds. A smell that did not belong in the purity of the divine realm. It was not the clean scent of ozone that followed his lightning, nor the sweet smell of nectar from the feasts. It was burnt. It was the smell of industry. It was the scent of burning wood. His gaze, which spanned the cosmos, narrowed. He looked down upon the earth. At first, he saw nothing, just the deep greens of his forests. But then, his eyes locked onto the anomaly. From a dark spot in the mountains, a thin, gray line was defiantly rising into his perfect sky. A column of smoke. Zeus frowned. A forest fire. Perhaps a bolt from a recent storm had struck a dry tree. But a storm only happens when he commands it. And he had commanded no storm. He focused his vision, piercing the sky, the clouds, and the stone of the mountainside. He looked directly into the cave that Prometheus had used as a shelter. What he saw stopped the breath in his divine lungs. He did not just see fire. He saw civilization. He saw the mud dolls gathered around a contained, controlled blaze. They were no longer naked, they wore the cured skins of animals. They were not starving, they were roasting meat on sharpened sticks. They were not helpless. In the corner of the cave, he saw a row of newly crafted spears, their points hardened black by the flame. He saw pottery, vessels of baked clay, holding water. He saw them talking. He saw them organizing. And near the fire, he saw one of the females painting a figure on the cave wall, using charcoal from the sacred flame itself. They were not just surviving. They were creating. They were thinking. And then he saw their faces. The hollow terror was gone. Their eyes, reflecting the light of the stolen fire, held ingenuity, confidence, and hope. Zeus realized what Prometheus had truly stolen. It wasn't just an ember from the forge. He had stolen the dividing line. He had blurred the boundary between mortal and God. He had given the power of creation, the very essence of the forge of Hephaestus, to these insects. He had given them the tools to one day challenge the very gods who ruled them. This was not a gift. This was an armament. This was the first act of a new war. The king of the gods did not speak. He did not move. He simply swelled. A silent, pressurized rage began to build, so intense that the marble of his own throne began to crack under the sudden drop in temperature. The sunlight on Olympus dimmed, as if a cloud had passed over the mountain, though there were no clouds. The other gods felt it. Apollo's music stuttered, a note souring. Ares stopped polishing his helmet. Hera, his queen, looked at her husband and saw the storm gathering, a storm worse than any lightning bolt. "Where?" Zeus whispered, and the whisper was louder than any shout, a sound of grinding mountains. "Is the Titan?" The gods looked around. Prometheus, the intellectual, the war consultant, the permanent outsider, was not in his customary place. He was not in the library. He was not walking the battlements. "Hephaestus!" Zeus roared. The blacksmith god, startled, hurried forward, limping heavily. "My king!" "Your forge," Zeus demanded, his voice shaking the pillars. "Who has been to your forge?" Hephaestus frowned, thinking. "No one, my lord. Only Prometheus. He came days ago. He said he was admiring the craft. He leaned on his walking stick." Hephaestus stopped. His eyes widened in horrified realization. The eternal fire. The walking stick. The Titan who always saw 10 steps ahead. Zeus rose from his throne. The power rolling off him forced the other gods to their knees. All except one. Athena remained standing, her face pale stone, her spear gripped tight. Zeus looked at her, and he knew. She had been complicit. She had given the soul, he had given the fire. "Treason," Zeus hissed. "Treason of the highest order. He has broken my decree. He has armed the mud. He has contaminated the world with ambition." The gods trembled. They knew what this meant. The king's stability had been threatened. His order had been violated. "He believes he has given them a gift," Zeus continued, pacing, the sky outside the hall turning black. "He thinks he has given them hope. I will show him what he has truly unleashed. They wanted the fire? They will learn that every divine gift comes wrapped in poison. They want to be like us? Then they will suffer like us." The king of the gods made his judgment. There would be 2 punishments, one for the thief, and one for the recipients of the stolen goods. Humanity, for daring to accept the warmth and the light, would receive a gift of their own. A gift, forged by all the gods, so beautiful and so terrible it would unravel the very civilization Prometheus had just begun. But first, the traitor. "Hermes!" Zeus bellowed. The messenger god appeared instantly. "Find him. Find the Titan. Bring him here. But he is not to come as a guest." Zeus turned to his blacksmith. "Hephaestus, you will forge chains. Chains that cannot be broken by God or Titan. You will build the punishment that your stolen fire deserves." And to his other agents, the twin embodiments of his will, Kratos and Bia, strength and violence, Zeus pointed to the earth. "Go with the messenger. The Titan is on the mortal plane, playing God to his children of mud. Remind him what a true God is. On Earth, a golden age had begun. It was an age measured not in years, but in hours. Humanity, fueled by cooked food and protected by fire, learned at a rate that defied the laws of nature. Prometheus was their center. He was no longer just a creator. He was a teacher, a guide, the center of their new universe. He taught them language, moving beyond simple sounds to complex ideas. He taught them mathematics by charting the shadows cast by the sun. He taught them community, showing them how the strength of the tribe was greater than the strength of the individual. He showed them how to craft better shelters, how to read the seasons, how to cure the skins of the animals they now hunted. They were building the foundations of the world. Prometheus watched them, and the pride in his chest was a physical ache. This, he thought, this is the meaning the gods on Olympus had missed. This was purpose. He knew it wouldn't last. His forethought was a constant whisper, a cold dread beneath the warmth of the fire. The smoke rising from their hearth was a ticking clock. Every spear they sharpened, every pot they baked, was another line in his confession. He was simply waiting for the sentence to be carried out. It happened on what humanity would later call the 12th day of fire. The air changed. It didn't just grow cold, it grew heavy, dense, charged with a static that had nothing to do with weather. The flames in the central hearth, which had burned bright and steady, suddenly sputtered, turning a sickly blue. The humans, who had just begun to laugh and talk, fell silent. Their animal instincts, still fresh, screamed that something impossible was approaching. Prometheus stood. He walked to the mouth of the cave and looked up. 3 figures were descending from the sky. They did not fly like birds, they fell like judgments, landing without a sound at the entrance to the cave. Humanity cowered. They recognized divinity, but this was not the kind, weary face of their teacher. This was the cold, perfect, terrifying face of Olympian power. The first was Hermes, the messenger, son of Zeus. He was light, almost casual, winged sandals fluttering. He carried his staff, the caduceus, and smiled, though the smile held no warmth. He was the diplomat of the regime, the one who delivered the warrant. The other 2 did not smile. They were Kratos and Bia, strength and force. They were not gods of music or wisdom, they were the physical embodiment of Zeus's will. They were divine enforcers. Kratos was a mountain of contained power, his eyes empty of pity. Bia was shadow and speed, radiating an aura of pure, impatient violence. They stood, blocking the light. "Father," one of the young humans whispered, tugging on Prometheus's arm, pointing at the newcomers, not understanding. Prometheus gently pushed the human back toward the fire. He stepped forward, placing himself between the Olympians and his children. "Greetings, Hermes," Prometheus said, his voice level. "I assume this is not a social visit." Hermes's smile widened. "Always to the point, son of Iapetus. Forethought sees what is right in front of it. You make my job easy. The king is displeased." "Displeased," Prometheus repeated, glancing at Kratos and Bia. "Your companions suggest a stronger term." "The king is furious," Hermes corrected, his casual air dropping. "The king has seen your work. He has seen the smoke. He has seen the spears. You broke the decree. You stole from the forge of a god. You gave technology, power, and the spark of ambition to the clay." Hermes unrolled a scroll that appeared from nowhere. "By the authority of Zeus, king of Olympus, lord of the sky, you are charged with celestial theft, corruption of the mortal plane, and high treason against the divine order. You are to be brought to Olympus. Immediately. For sentencing." Behind Prometheus, the humans, understanding the tone if not the words, began to cry out. A few of the men, made brave by their new spears, stepped forward, holding their fire-hardened weapons, ready to defend their god. Kratos took one step. The sheer force of his presence cracked the stone floor of the cave. The men dropped their spears, paralyzed by a divine terror they had never known. "No," Prometheus commanded, turning to his children. He looked at them, his face a mask of profound sorrow. This was the hardest lesson. "Do not fight them," he said, his voice urgent. "You cannot fight them. To fight them is to be annihilated. This is not your battle." "But they are taking you," the first woman cried out. "This," Prometheus said, tapping his own chest, "is the price. I knew the price when I stole the spark. Do not let the price be your lives." He looked at them all, trying to pour centuries of wisdom into one final gaze. "Listen to me. This is my last lesson. Guard the fire. Never let it die. Teach your children what I have taught you. Survive. Thrive. But know this, the gods will now watch you. They will hate you, because you hold the power they forbade. And they will try to trick you. He looked directly at the first man, the leader of the tribe. Especially, beware of gifts from Zeus. Do not accept anything that comes from that mountain. Trust nothing that seems too perfect. Trust only what you build with your own hands, and what you earn with your own minds. Do you understand? They nodded, weeping, not understanding the warning, but committing the words to memory. Prometheus turned back to the Olympians. He held out his immortal wrists. I am ready. Hermes nodded. He did not look pleased. This was not a victory, it was a cleanup. Kratos and Bia stepped forward. They seized the Titan. This was not a polite arrest. It was violence. They grabbed his arms, their divine strength crushing his resistance before it could even begin. They bound him in temporary chains of celestial bronze, forged by Hephaestus while the king was giving his orders. What of them? Bia whispered, her voice like scraping knives, gesturing to the terrified humans. The king, Hermes said, has another plan for them. Hermes placed his staff on Prometheus's shoulder. Kratos and Bia held him firm. In a flash of intolerable light that bleached the cave walls white, the four gods vanished. They were gone. The heavy presence of Olympian power was lifted. The cave was suddenly, terribly empty. The humans were left alone. They looked at the empty space where their god, their father, their teacher, had stood. Then they looked at the spears on the ground. And then, as one, they turned and looked at the fire. It was the only thing he had left them. In a blinding flash of divine transport, Prometheus was gone from the earth. He reappeared, not gently, but hurled onto the polished floor of the Olympian throne room. The temporary bronze chains, forged in Hephaestus's rage, bit into his immortal flesh. He was forced to his knees. Kratos and Bia, strength and force, stood behind him, their heavy presence an anchor, ensuring he could not rise. The hall was full. Every major god was present. They were not seated comfortably, they stood in rigid formation, like a military tribunal. Apollo, Ares, Hera, Poseidon. They lined the hall, their faces cold, impassive. This was not a trial, it was a sentencing. There was no defense to be offered here. And in the back, behind the others, stood Athena. Her face was the color of ash. She refused to meet his gaze. She had given humanity the soul, but she was Zeus's daughter. She knew her place, and she knew the price of defying him twice. She remained silent, a prisoner of her own wisdom. At the far end of the hall, seated on his massive throne, was Zeus. The air around him was perfectly still. The roaring fury of the discovery was gone, replaced by something far more terrifying, the absolute, cold certainty of judgment. The king of the cosmos had been defied. The very foundation of his new order had been challenged, not by a Titan enemy, but by a Titan ally. Zeus looked down at the Titan kneeling on his floor. Prometheus, son of Iapetus, Zeus began, his voice dangerously quiet, yet it filled every corner of the vast hall. We honored you. You, a Titan, walked these halls as an equal. You sat at our table. You advised our council. In return, we asked only one thing, obedience to the new order. The order you helped create. He leaned forward. I decreed that the creatures of clay were to remain animals. I forbade the divine fire. You ignored the decree. You stole from the forge. You have armed them. You have given them the means to defy nature, and one day, to defy us. Explain yourself. Prometheus lifted his head. He was defeated, but he was not broken. The fire he had given humanity was now burning in his own eyes. There is nothing to explain, Prometheus said, his voice clear, echoing in the stunned silence. Only to justify. You created a flawless universe, Zeus. A perfect, polished, predictable machine. It was beautiful, and it was empty. It was a masterpiece hanging in a dark room. You rule rocks and rivers and beasts that act only on instinct. You rule slaves. I made beings capable of wonder, the Titan continued, his voice rising. I made beings who could look at Apollo's sun and not just feel warmth, but feel gratitude. I made an audience for your divine play. And yes, I gave them fire. Because the consciousness that Athena gave them. A collective gasp echoed in the hall. He had implicated her. Athena shut her eyes, bracing for her father's rage. That consciousness, Prometheus pressed on, was a curse without the tools to endure it. You gave them a world of ice and teeth. I gave them a chance. You hate them not because they have fire. You hate them because, for the first time, they are no longer afraid of the dark. And you rule only through fear. Zeus's stillness finally broke. He rose slowly from his throne. Fear, Zeus countered. I gave the universe order. I defeated the chaos of your Titan brethren. That fire you so admire, that is the chaos. You think they will paint pictures and sing songs? They will melt mountains. They will forge weapons. They will turn that fire against the animals, against each other, and finally, they will turn it against this very mountain. You did not give them hope, Titan. You gave them the seed of their own annihilation. If they destroy themselves, it will be their choice. Prometheus roared, struggling against Kratos. You gave them nothing. I gave them choice. That is the difference between a subject and a soul. Then they will choose to suffer, Zeus whispered. And you will choose to watch. Your sentence is twofold. One for the thief, and one for the recipients. He turned first to Hephaestus. The blacksmith god stepped forward, avoiding Prometheus's gaze. He was furious his forge had been violated, conflicted that his own secret fire was the cause. Hephaestus, Zeus commanded. The temporary chains will not do. You will forge a set of shackles from the strongest metal in the cosmos. Links that even a Titan cannot break. Chains that will bind him not just physically, but bind his very essence, his power, his divine spark. Then Zeus turned back to Prometheus. You love the humans you created. You love the earth. You will be taken to the farthest reaches of that earth. To the Caucasus mountains. There, you will be chained to the highest peak, suspended between the heavens you betrayed and the mortals you corrupted. You will not sit. You will not sleep. You will endure the freezing night and the boiling sun, forever. That, Zeus said, is your punishment. But the punishment for humanity, that must be more creative. A terrible smile touched the king's lips. They have his gift. They have the fire. They have hope. They believe they have won. We must balance the scales. We, the gods, will send them a gift of our own. A gift to match his fire. He turned to the council. Hephaestus, you will sculpt me another creature. Not from base mud this time. Sculpt her from the finest materials of the earth, mixed with the waters of the heavens. Make her face in the image of the immortal goddesses. Make her form perfect. He looked at the other gods. Each of you will provide a gift. Aphrodite, you will give her unparalleled beauty and the sting of desire. Apollo, you will teach her music and the art of the honeyed lie. Hermes, he glanced at the messenger, you will give her a cunning, curious mind, and a heart that is faithless and deceitful. And finally, he looked directly at his daughter. And Athena, you will weave her garments. You will teach her the domestic arts. You will make her civilized. It was a trap. Athena was forced to participate, to help build the weapon that would undo her own secret work. She will be irresistible, Zeus proclaimed. A beautiful, perfect, civilized poison. We will call her Pandora, the all-gifted. And she will carry one final gift from me, in a sealed jar, to the foolish brother of our condemned Titan, the afterthought Prometheus. Prometheus warned them to fear our gifts. We will see if their new wisdom is strong enough to resist true beauty. The sentence is passed, Zeus thundered. He pointed at Prometheus. Kratos, Bia, take him to the end of the world. Kratos and Bia seized the Titan. As he was dragged from the hall, Prometheus looked one last time at Athena. She met his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw not betrayal, but the cold, calculating look of strategic wisdom. She was already planning. She was Forethought's only ally, and she was already looking 1,000 years into the future. Prometheus was dragged from the light of Olympus, to begin his eternity of darkness. Prometheus was dragged from the light. The trial was over, the sentence had begun. Kratos and Bia, strength and force, did not lead him gently. Gripping the Titan by his temporary chains, they launched themselves from the peak of Olympus, dragging their prisoner through the void between worlds. This was a journey of humiliation. They dragged him across the whole of the earth he claimed to love, moving faster than the eye can follow. He saw the world blur beneath him, the green forests where his children were hiding, the great oceans, the barren deserts. They flew until they reached the edge of everything. They came to the Scythian wilderness, a land unclaimed by any god, uninhabited by any life. They came to the Caucasus mountains. This was not the beautiful, snow-capped range that humans would one day paint. This was the border of the world, a jagged, wind-scoured wasteland where the sky met the earth in a permanent, brutalist storm. They chose the highest peak, a sheer cliff face exposed to every wind, scorched by the sun and frozen by the night. Kratos and Bia slammed Prometheus against the rock. The impact shook the mountain range. The Titan was immortal, but he felt the agony. A moment later, a third figure arrived. He did not fly with the enforcers. Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, materialized from the heat of his own forge, his great hammer in one hand. In the other, he carried his newest creation. They were not just chains, they were a masterpiece of malice, forged from the unbreakable metal called adamantine. Hephaestus looked at Prometheus, then at the desolate cliff. The blacksmith, the craftsman, the laborer of the gods, looked utterly miserable. He hated this. Prometheus was the only other god who understood what it meant to make something. "Get on with it, Smith," Kratos grunted, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The king is waiting. The law must be served." Hephaestus looked at the chains, then at the Titan. "Oh, Prometheus," the blacksmith agonized, his voice heavy. "I hate my craft today. I hate the skill that forces me to bind my own kin to this rock. This is a cruel payment for your kindness." "Kindness?" Bia sneered, her voice like cracking ice. "It was treason. He broke the order. Stop your whining, Hephaestus. Your sentiment is as weak as his crime was arrogant. Do your work, or the king will find someone else to chain you next to him." Hephaestus flinched. The threat was real. With a heavy sigh, he raised the first shackle. Kratos and Bia seized Prometheus's right arm, flattening it against the rock face. Hephaestus placed the adamantine cuff around the Titan's wrist. He raised his divine hammer. "I am sorry, brother," he whispered. "Do it," Prometheus said, his voice quiet, defiant. His eyes were not on Hephaestus. They were looking south, toward the land where humanity hid. Hephaestus struck the rivet. The sound was not a simple clang. It was a cosmic boom, the sound of divine metal being permanently bonded to the core of the world. The chain was set. The mountains screamed. They moved to the other wrist. Again, the hammer fell. Again, the sound of finality. Prometheus was now pinned by his arms. "This is not enough," Kratos declared. The king's sentence was specific. They forced Prometheus upright against the cliff, his arms spread wide, a grotesque mockery of the humans he had shaped. Hephaestus took the heaviest links and bound his waist, locking his torso to the stone. Then his ankles, nailing his feet just above the ledge, ensuring he could never rest his weight. He was suspended, not sitting, not standing, just held. But Zeus's command was not finished. Hephaestus brought out the final piece. It was not a chain. It was a wedge. A thick, brutal spike of pure adamantine. "Through his chest," Kratos commanded. "Pin him to the rock like the insect he is." Hephaestus recoiled. This is too much. He is bound. He cannot escape. The sentence is not just confinement, Bia hissed. It is punishment. Drive the spike. Hephaestus, weeping now with rage and shame, hefted the spike. Kratos and Bia held the Titan steady. The blacksmith god placed the point against Prometheus's chest, just over his immortal heart. He raised the hammer. Prometheus braced himself. He did not beg. He did not scream. He thought of the fire in the cave, and the wide eyes of the first human child, and he took the blow. The hammer struck. The wedge drove through his divine flesh, pinning his very essence to the stone. The work was done. Hephaestus dropped his hammer and vanished, unable to witness the horror he had enabled. Kratos stepped back, inspecting the bonds. They were perfect, unbreakable, eternal. "So," Kratos said, walking up to the bound Titan. "This is forethought. Did your precious forethought see this, Titan? You, who taught the mud dolls how to defy the heavens. Now you are suspended between heaven and earth, belonging to neither." Bia laughed. "Let the humans sing songs to you now. Let them see what happens to a god who forgets his place. Let them see what happens to those who play with the king's fire." Prometheus said nothing. He stared past them, toward the horizon. His defiance was his silence. "We are finished here," Kratos said, satisfied. The two enforcers, strength and force, launched themselves from the cliff, vanishing back toward the comfort of Olympus. And Prometheus was left, alone. The wind tore at him, the first wind of his new eternity. It was impossibly cold, a wind that carried no scent of life, only the smell of iron and ice. Below him, the world was a distant map. Above him, the sky was a cold, indifferent gray. The sun began its descent, and for the first time, Prometheus, the bringer of warmth, felt the true, absolute, unending cold. His sentence had just begun. Prometheus was gone. Silence fell on the Caucasus. But on Olympus, the work of vengeance was only half finished. Zeus returned to his throne, the cold satisfaction of the Titan's judgment radiating from him. The thief was paying his price, trapped in an eternity of isolation and pain. Now, the king of the gods turned his attention to the beneficiaries of the crime. Humanity. They were still on Earth, huddled in their caves, tending their stolen fire. They possessed the warmth of the forge, the hope of civilization, and the final, defiant warning of their savior. Beware of gifts from Zeus. Zeus smiled. He has warned them against me, the king announced to the assembled court. He believes his forethought has armed them against my power. But you cannot arm afterthought. We will not send them an army. We will not send a flood. We will send them a gift. A gift so perfect, they will beg to receive it. He looked at his son, the divine blacksmith. Hephaestus. Hephaestus, still shaken, his hands still smelling of the mountain air and the iron of the spikes, stepped forward. He was pale with dread. My king, you have done well forging chains for a traitor, Zeus said. Now, you will forge a new masterpiece. A reward for his pets. I want you to create a being. Not from mud and filth, like the Titan's creatures. You will use the finest materials of the earth, gold and pure water and white marble. Sculpt me, a virgin. Make her form in the likeness of the immortal goddesses. Make her so beautiful that to look upon her is to feel pain. Hephaestus, trapped, bowed. His labor of hate continued. He returned to his forge, not to hammer weapons, but to sculpt flesh. He crafted a form so exquisite it shamed his own statues of the goddesses. She was a living sculpture, anatomically perfect, flawless. But, like Prometheus's first creations, she was empty. Zeus called the assembly line of the gods. This would be their collective revenge. She must be endowed, he commanded. She will be our creation. She must represent us all. First came Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She approached the beautiful statue. She did not just grant beauty, Hephaestus had already done that. Aphrodite poured in the venom of her domain, uncontrollable desire. She gave her an irresistible charm, a gaze that promised everything, and a grace that would shatter the mind of any mortal, or god, who saw her. Next, Zeus turned to his daughter, the silent, gray-eyed traitor. Athena. Athena stepped forward, her face an impassive mask. She knew what this was. This was her punishment for her complicity. She was being forced to arm the weapon that would destroy her own secret work. Zeus commanded her to teach the creation the domestic arts. Trapped, Athena obeyed the letter of the law. She wove the most exquisite golden garments, robes that shimmered like captured moonlight. She taught the empty vessel how to handle the loom, how to weave, how to be the perfect, civilized companion. She gave her the gift of craft. Then came Apollo. He laughed, seeing the game. He gave her the gift of music, a voice that sounded like his own lyre, a voice that could soothe a beast or charm a king. And with that honeyed voice, he gave her the subtle ability to mask any truth, to weave beautiful lies. The final additions were the most critical. Zeus summoned Hermes, his swift, cunning messenger. Son, Zeus said, she is beautiful. She is crafted. She is talented. Now, you must make her interesting. Hermes, the trickster god, the god of thieves and boundaries, leaned in close to the creation. He smiled. He whispered into her perfect ear, and as he did, he implanted his gifts, a sharp, restless, and deceitful mind, a shameless heart, and most importantly, the seed that would unravel everything, insatiable, burning curiosity. Zeus watched as the gifts settled. The creation opened its eyes. She was alive. She was not a human, born of earth. She was a construct, born of malice. What is her name? Asked Hera, watching with cold jealousy. She is the product of us all, Zeus proclaimed. Every god has given her a piece of their power. We will call her Pandora, the all-gifted. Pandora stood. She looked at the gods, and she bowed, her every movement a masterpiece of Aphrodite's charm. She was the perfect poison, a weapon disguised as a prize. One last item remained. Zeus himself provided the final gift. He presented an object, an ornate, heavy jar, sealed with the king's own seal. It was beautifully crafted, but it radiated a dark, ancient energy. Pandora, Zeus said, his voice kind, paternal. This is your dowry. A gift from me. It contains things. But you must never, ever, under any circumstances, open it. This one thing is forbidden. Do you understand? Pandora, programmed by Hermes, looked at the jar, her new curiosity already burning. She nodded obediently, her Apollo-given voice like honey. Yes, my lord. I understand. Zeus knew the nature of the mind Hermes had given her. To forbid something to this creature was to guarantee its destruction. The trap was complete. Zeus had studied his enemy. Prometheus, forethought, was chained to the rock. But his brother, Epimetheus, afterthought, still lived among the humans, tending the fire. Epimetheus, the fool, the one who acted first and regretted later. Prometheus had warned him, accept no gifts from Zeus. Zeus smiled. He was sending a gift that Epimetheus would be physically, emotionally, and divinely incapable of refusing. Hermes, the king commanded. Take her. Lead her down the path to earth. Present this magnificent creature, and her dowry, to Epimetheus. On Earth, humanity huddled around their stolen fire, their world suddenly empty. Their teacher, their protector, their creator, had been taken from them in a flash of terrifying light. They were alone. Almost. Living among them, as he always had, was the other titan, Epimetheus. Prometheus's brother. Where Prometheus was forethought, all planning, all strategy, all sacrifice, Epimetheus was his opposite. His name meant afterthought. He was the titan of impulse, of reaction, defined not by what he planned, but by what he regretted. Epimetheus was kind. He loved the humans. He helped them tend the fire, but he did not know how to invent. He only knew how to maintain. He grieved his brother, and he held on to his brother's final warning, repeating it to the tribe every night. Guard the fire, and beware of gifts from Zeus. Accept nothing from Olympus. He intended to obey. He truly did. Then, Hermes arrived. He did not come as he had before, flanked by the brutal enforcers Kratos and Bia. He came as the god of boundaries, the golden diplomat, arriving in a shimmer of warm light. He smiled. Greetings, Titan Epimetheus, Hermes said, his voice soothing. The king, Zeus, in his wisdom, sees that the world is now balanced. The thief has been punished. But the king does not wish enmity upon the mortal race, nor upon you, who remained loyal. He sees your loneliness. And so, he sends a gift. A peace offering. To begin a new, harmonious age. Epimetheus tensed, the warning screaming in his mind. My brother said. Your brother, Hermes interrupted gently, is a traitor. Would you listen to the words of a criminal, or accept the generosity of your king? And then, Hermes stepped aside. Behind him stood Pandora. Epimetheus stopped breathing. He had seen the humans, crafted from river mud, beautiful in their own rough way. He had seen the goddesses on Olympus, radiant but terrible in their power. This was neither. This was something engineered. Her beauty, the gift of Aphrodite, was not just pleasant, it was an assault. It was a physical force that bypassed thought. Her robes, the work of Athena, shimmered. Her smile, crafted by Apollo and Hermes, seemed to know him completely, to forgive him, to admire him. This is Pandora, Hermes said. The all-gifted. A companion for you. A gift for humanity. From all the gods. Epimetheus looked at her. In that single moment, every warning his brother had ever given him, every lesson of caution, every plea for forethought, evaporated. He was afterthought. He saw the gift, and he acted. The regret could come later. I accept, Epimetheus said, his voice choked. Hermes smiled the smile of a predator that has watched its prey walk willingly into the snare. Wonderful! Hermes presented Pandora to Epimetheus, and the humans gathered, marveling at her perfection. The messenger god also placed one other item on the floor of their main dwelling, the ornate, heavy, sealed jar. A dowry from the king, Hermes mentioned casually. With one small condition of etiquette. He has sealed it for her protection. It is never to be opened. Enjoy the peace, Titan. And like that, Hermes was gone. Pandora's arrival was magic. She taught the women the weaving skills of Athena. She sang the songs of Apollo, filling the cold caves with music for the first time. Humanity adored her. Epimetheus believed he was the luckiest being in the cosmos. He had forgotten the warning. He had forgotten the pain. But the jar remained. It sat in the corner of their dwelling. Pandora, the creation, was living her programming. The curiosity implanted by Hermes began as an itch. Then it became a whisper. She would weave, and her eyes would drift to the jar. She would sing, and she would find herself wondering about the seal. Why would the gods send such a magnificent vessel, filled with unknown treasures, and then forbid it. What could be so precious, or so dangerous, that it must remain locked? The command of Zeus, "Do not open," battled the impulse from Hermes. "You must know." The curiosity became an obsession. She began to hear things from inside the jar. Or perhaps she imagined it. A scratching. A multitude of whispers, begging to be released. One day, Prometheus was away, leading the hunt. The cave was quiet, save for the crackling of the central fire. Pandora stood alone, staring at the jar. She rationalized. Perhaps it was jewels. Perhaps it was more knowledge. Perhaps it was the secret to making humanity as beautiful as she was. It was a gift. How could a gift be harmful? Zeus's command wasn't a warning, it was a test. A test of her loyalty, surely. But perhaps, just one look. How could one look violate the spirit of the law? Her hands, guided by a force she did not understand, moved toward the seal. It was the seal of the king himself. She broke it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She hesitated. The whispers from inside the jar grew frantic, excited. She lifted the lid. There was no gold. There were no jewels. There was only a cloud. A thick, black, screaming cloud of shadows. Dark spirits, the daimons, the physical embodiments of every misery the gods had kept locked away from the world. They poured from the jar like a plague of insects, spectral and venomous. Out they flew, screaming in triumph, freed from their prison. The first spirit was sickness, which stung Pandora, making her cough, the first illness. Then came old age, a gray shadow that settled over the tribe. Then came pain, and grief, and jealousy, and envy, and greed. And the darkest shadow of all, the spirit of war, which laughed as it saw the humans sharpen spears. The spirit swarmed out of the cave, spreading across the entire globe, invisible, stinging the whole of the human race, infecting the new world with a complexity of divine misery. Pandora screamed, horrified, realizing the nature of the trap. Prometheus heard the scream and ran back, dropping his spear, seeing the last of the dark shadows escape. He finally understood. Afterthought. He realized what his impulsiveness had cost the world. Pandora, weeping, slammed the heavy lid back onto the jar, but it was too late. Everything was gone. The world was forever changed. Humanity, which had only known cold and hunger, would now know betrayal, disease, and malice. As Pandora and Prometheus wept over the empty vessel, a tiny, fluttering sound came from inside. One last thing had been trapped, too slow, too gentle to escape with the violent spirits. Pandora looked inside. At the very bottom of the jar was one tiny, flickering light. A spirit with shimmering, weak wings. It was not a misery. It was Olympus, the spirit of hope. Before it, too, could escape and fly away, abandoning mankind, Pandora sealed the lid tight, trapping it inside the jar forever. The evils were now loose in the world, but humanity, alone, possessed the one thing that could endure them. The last gift of the gods, trapped in the empty box, forever held in their hands. Silence. A terrible, profound silence descended upon the dwelling of Prometheus. The black cloud of spirits was gone, dispersed into the winds, eager to begin their work. Pandora and Prometheus, the first tragic couple, stared at the jar in her hands. It was just a clay vessel now. Beautiful, ornate, and the source of the world's ending. They had slammed the lid shut, trapping the last fluttering spirit, hope. But it was too late for everything else. The world outside the cave, which moments before had been vibrant with the progress of the new tribe, felt the change instantly. The golden age of fire and innocence was over. The age of misery had begun. The first human to feel the infection was an elder who was instructing the young in sharpening spears. As he spoke, a sudden, unfamiliar agony seized his back. His joints stiffened, locking with a grinding pain. His strength fled him. He gasped and dropped the spear, clutching his chest. This was the spirit of old age, of decay, which until that moment had not existed for them. Life had been hard, but the body had been strong, until a quick death from a predator. This new thing, this was slow. This was internal. In the fields, a child who was running suddenly stopped. A fire, different from the hearth fire, bloomed behind her eyes. Her skin grew hot, her breathing shallow. She collapsed, shivering and burning at the same time. The spirit of sickness, of fever, had found its first home. Her mother ran to her, trying to cool her with water, but this enemy was invisible. But the most venomous spirits were the ones that attacked not the body, but the mind. Two hunters, brothers who had always shared their kills according to Prometheus's law of the tribe, brought down a great deer. When they began to divide the meat, one brother found himself staring at the best portion. He wanted it. He deserved it. Why should he share equally? The invisible spirit of greed whispered in his ear. The other brother saw the look in his eye, and the spirit of envy stung his heart. An argument began. Then a shove. Then, for the first time, two humans raised their voices against each other in pure malice. Pandora and Prometheus emerged from their dwelling. They saw the sickness. They heard the argument. They saw the new, cold suspicion in the eyes of the tribe. Prometheus finally understood. This was the curse of afterthought. That perfect, agonizing clarity that arrives only after the irreversible mistake. He had been warned. His brother, the wisest of all beings, had given him one simple command: fear the gifts of Zeus. And he, blinded by beauty, seduced by charm, had welcomed the poison into their home. He had doomed the very race his brother had sacrificed everything to save. Pandora wept, clutching the jar that now held only hope. She was the weapon, the carrier, the perfect, beautiful trap. She, the all-gifted, was the carrier of all misery. This wave of spiritual poison did not stop at the edge of the human village. It rolled across the entire planet, an invisible tsunami of pain, grief, and conflict. It infected every living mortal. And the psychic shockwave of that collective agony traveled, faster than the wind, until it reached the edge of the world. It reached the Caucasus mountains. Prometheus was hanging in his chains. He had endured the burning days and the impossible, freezing nights. He had endured the tearing wind and the isolation. His physical torture was absolute. But until this moment, his spirit had been defiant. He had won, he believed. Humanity had his fire. They were surviving. His sacrifice had meaning. Then, the wave hit him. It was a pain far beyond the spike in his chest. As the Titan of forethought, he was linked to the destiny of his creation. He felt it. He felt the sickness enter their lungs. He felt the greed curdle their hearts. He felt the cold touch of old age stiffen their limbs. His divine vision, his curse, showed him what was happening. He saw his humans coughing, wasting away. He saw the two brothers arguing. And then he saw the argument escalate, until one of them picked up the fire-hardened spear, the very tool Prometheus had taught him to make, and threatened his own brother. He saw the future he had just created. He saw the fire being used not just to warm hearths, but to burn villages. He saw the spears used not just on lions, but on men. He saw his gift of civilization, corrupted by the spirits of Pandora's jar, turning into the very chaos that Zeus had warned against. Zeus had not taken the fire away. That would have been too simple. Instead, the king of the gods had poisoned the recipients. He had allowed them to keep the gift, knowing they would now use it to destroy themselves. Prometheus understood the true nature of his punishment. It was not the chain. It was not the rock. This was the sentence. To hang here, helpless, immortal, and watch. The Titan who had refused to scream when the adamantine spike was driven through his chest, now roared. It was a sound of pure cosmic despair, an agony so profound it shook the foundations of the rock. He had failed. He had saved humanity from the cold, only to deliver them to their own worst natures. Zeus, with his beautiful, perfect trap, had won. Time, for mortals, began to accelerate. Fueled by fire and plagued by the spirits of the jar, humanity learned to farm, to build walls, to wage war, and to die of disease. They created governments and religions. They lived, they suffered, they loved, and they were buried. But on the peak of the Caucasus, time did not pass. There was only the sentence. Prometheus hung in his adamantine chains. His physical torment was the rhythm of the planet, scorched by the unfiltered sun at noon, frozen by the high-altitude winds at midnight. But this pain was dull, a backdrop to the true torture, his vision. He watched humanity. He saw his gift, the fire of civilization, used exactly as Zeus had predicted. He saw his spears used for murder. He saw his fire used to burn the homes of others. He saw the spirits of greed and envy poison every court, every tribe, every heart. He watched his children suffer, age, and die, plagued by the evils he had indirectly unleashed by trusting his foolish brother. He roared in despair, but mostly, he endured in silence. His sacrifice felt meaningless. He was the great failure, chained to the wall of his own ruined experiment. On Olympus, Zeus watched. He watched the new, chaotic, miserable world of humanity, and he was satisfied. The Pandora trap had worked perfectly. His order was secure. Humanity, crippled by its own nature, would never be a threat. But one thing still bothered him. He looked toward the Caucasus. He saw the Titan. Prometheus was suffering, yes. But he was not broken. He was silent. He did not beg for mercy. He did not curse Zeus. He simply endured. His silence was an act of supreme defiance. He was a martyr, and as long as he hung there, a silent symbol of rebellion, Zeus's victory was incomplete. The king decided the punishment must escalate. The psychological torture and the isolation were not enough. There must be an active, daily reminder of the king's wrath. Zeus needed an agent. A creature without pity, without thought, that would execute the sentence without fail. He reached back, past the age of the Olympians, to the monstrous forces that existed before his order. He commanded the creation of a beast born of chaos, a creature whose only purpose was pain. It was the Caucasian eagle. This was no ordinary bird. It was a monster, the size of a man, with wings so vast they blotted out the sun. Its feathers were like honed metal, and its beak and talons were forged from the same dark, divine material as the spikes driven into Prometheus's flesh. It was not a creature of nature, it was a living instrument of divine judgment. Its eyes held no intelligence, only a singular burning hunger, implanted by the king of the gods. On the rock, Prometheus had fallen into the dull rhythm of his pain. Then, one midday, the sun vanished. He looked up, thinking it a storm cloud. It was not. A shadow fell over him, and he heard a sound he had never heard before, the sound of massive, tearing wings beating the thin air. The creature landed. It did not land on the rock beside him, it landed directly on him. Its massive talons, sharp as scalpels, dug deep into his thighs and shoulders, gripping him, pinning him even tighter against the stone. The eagle stared at him, its head cocked, its eyes black and empty. Prometheus, defiant, stared back. "Zeus is a coward," the Titan hissed. "He sends a mindless beast to do the work he cannot." The eagle did not care. It was not there to talk. It was there to obey its programming. It lowered its monstrous head. With its adamantine beak, it tore open the flesh of the Titan's abdomen. Prometheus, immortal, could not faint. He could not look away. He felt the beak rip through muscle and sinew, an agony so precise and so invasive it dwarfed the pain of the chains. The eagle found what it was looking for. It plunged its head into the wound and began to eat his liver. Prometheus screamed. This time, he screamed. It was not the roar of cosmic despair, it was the raw, physical cry of pure, unending violation. The beast was methodical. It tore and ate, fulfilling its divine function, ignoring the screams of the immortal god pinned beneath it. 4 hours, the torture continued. Finally, its hunger sated, the monster, covered in the Titan's immortal blood, spread its vast wings. With a single powerful thrust, it launched itself back into the sky and vanished toward the sun. Prometheus was left hanging, mutilated, shattered, the spikes still in his chest, his torso torn open to the wind. This, he thought. This is the true sentence. But the curse of the gods was layered. As the sun set and the freezing night returned, the Titan's flesh, the gift of his immortality, began its work. The wound closed. The torn muscle knit itself back together. The devoured liver, the source of his divine strength, began to grow. Through the agonizing cold of the dark, he healed. By the time the first rays of the morning sun touched the peak, Prometheus was whole again. His flesh was perfect. His body was restored. He was exactly as he had been the morning before. He hung there, catching his breath in the dawn air, knowing what was coming. And, just as the sun cleared the horizon, he heard it again. Far in the distance. The sound of massive wings, returning. The eagle was coming back. It was hungry again. His eternity had found its new rhythm. For Prometheus, the rhythm of eternity had been established. It was a rhythm of 2 heartbeats. The dawn beat was agony, the arrival of the eagle, the sound of tearing wings, the shadow falling over the rock, the hours of intimate, visceral torment as his liver was devoured. The dusk beat was exhaustion, the departure of the beast, the slow, agonizing regeneration of his flesh in the freezing, absolute dark. He hung, suspended, watching the microscopic struggles of humanity in his mind's eye, his sacrifice poisoned by Pandora's release. He was the ultimate symbol of failure. He was alone. He thought he would be alone forever. Centuries, perhaps millennia, passed in this red haze of pain and cold endurance. Then one day, after the eagle had departed, a new sound joined the eternal whistle of the wind. It was not the shriek of the predator. It was weeping. A mist rose from the canyons below, a mist that did not belong on this dry, storm-blasted peak. It coalesced, and Prometheus realized he was surrounded. They were the daughters of the ocean. The Oceanids. They were nymphs, the children of the ancient Titan, Oceanus. They were sea spirits, forces of the old world, the world before Zeus's cold, hard order. They fluttered around his rock, their forms shifting like water, their faces pictures of profound, terrified sympathy. They had heard the echoes of the hammer blows that chained him, heard his roar of despair, and had finally gathered the courage to travel from their deep-sea caves to the end of the world to see the truth. "Oh, brave, foolish cousin," their voices whispered, a chorus of sorrow. "Oh, Prometheus, we saw what you did. We saw the gift of fire. But look what your defiance has cost you. Look at this, horror. Zeus is the new king. His lightning is the new law. Why did you fight him? Why did you choose this?" Prometheus, his body still healing from the day's torment, looked at them. It was the first interaction, the first conversation he'd had since his sentencing. "Weep not for me," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse and screaming. "Weep for the world that lives in such fear it confuses obedience with peace. Weep for the ones who have power but no compassion." "What you did was noble," the chorus whispered, afraid to speak too loudly, lest the sky hear. "But it was futile. Your children of mud are now suffering, plagued by the gifts of Pandora. You are here. Zeus has won." "He has not won as long as I remain defiant," Prometheus countered. As the nymphs wept, a new figure rose from the mists. This was not a fluttering spirit. This was a being of ancient power. It was their father, Oceanus, the great titan who ruled the river that encircled the globe. He rode a winged beast, and his face was heavy with concern. He was Prometheus's kin, a titan of the old generation. But he was a titan who had survived. Oceanus dismissed his daughters and approached the rock. Unlike the nymphs, he brought no sympathy. He brought politics. "Prometheus," the old titan said, his voice a heavy, flowing current. "Stop this. Just stop. I have come as family. I have come as an advisor. This display is pointless. It achieves nothing but your own pain. And what would you have me do, uncle?" Prometheus sneered. "Bend the knee from here?" "Yes," Oceanus insisted, desperate. "Apologize. You are forethought. Surely you see there is no future in this. Zeus is the king. This is the new reality. He is ruthless, yes, but he is also pragmatic. Your defiance is an insult to his authority. If you will only soften your words, if you will only concede that he is the master, I will go to him myself. I will plead your case. I will use all my influence. He may lessen the sentence. He may even free you. But you must yield." Prometheus stared at the titan of the sea. Oceanus was the great compromiser. He had remained neutral during the Titan War, keeping his rivers flowing while his brothers were hurled into Tartarus. He had survived by having no principles. "You counsel me?" Prometheus roared, the sound echoing off the desolate peaks. "You, who hid in your riverbed while the cosmos was remade. You tell me, the one who gave consciousness a tool to survive, to apologize for it? Never. Pride." Oceanus shouted. "This is pride, not principle. What good is your principle if you are chained to a rock for eternity while your humans suffer anyway?" "My principle is all I have left," Prometheus retorted. To apologize is to agree with him. It is to admit that humanity deserved to freeze in the dark. It is to say that his tyranny is just. And I will not. I will hang here until the mountains themselves crumble to dust before I give that tyrant the satisfaction of my submission. Now go, Oceanus. Go back to your safe rivers before your sympathy for me makes you a target. He will chain you next to me if you are not careful." Oceanus looked at the bound titan. He saw the fire in his eyes, the absolute, unbreakable will. Prometheus was mad, trapped by his own integrity. The old titan shook his head. "You have chosen your own path, son of Iapetus," Oceanus said sadly. "Do not blame the king for the consequences of your own stubbornness." The old god turned his mount and descended back into the mists, fleeing the dangerous air of the peak. The Oceanids fluttered one last time, weeping for the hero they could not save, promising to spread the story of his sacrifice. Then they too dissolved, leaving Prometheus alone. The sun was rising. The brief comfort of visitors was gone. Prometheus set his jaw and lifted his head toward the horizon. He heard the familiar, terrible sound returning on the dawn wind. The shadow was approaching. The eagle was hungry. The cycle resumed. The rhythm of the rock continued. The eagle came at dawn. The regeneration came at dusk. Prometheus endured. The visit from Oceanus had proven one thing: the gods value order over justice, and comfort over integrity. Prometheus was truly alone in his defiance. He hung in the wind, a monument of silent suffering. The centuries blurred into a single, seamless scar of agony. He grew accustomed to the wind, the ice, and the daily violation of the eagle. Then, he heard a new scream. It was not his own. It was not the shriek of the eagle. It was a cry of madness, laced with human despair. It came from the canyons far below his peak. He saw a figure scrambling up the rocks, moving with a frantic, unnatural speed, stumbling, rising, and running again, as if pursued by a demon. The figure finally reached his desolate ledge. It was a woman, her clothes torn to rags, her eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. This was Io, a princess of Argos. And she, too, was a victim of Olympus. She was not pursued by a monster, not by an army. She was being hunted by a single, relentless gadfly. It was a small insect, buzzing viciously around her head, a creature sent by Hera, the jealous queen of the gods. This tiny creature was an instrument of torture as perfect as Prometheus's eagle. It stung her again and again, a divine command driving her insane, never letting her rest, never letting her sleep, forcing her to wander the entire face of the planet without aim, without end. Io looked up at the figure chained to the rock. She saw the great spike through his chest and the wounds from the eagle. "Who are you?" she cried out, her voice broken. "Who are you, chained here at the end of the world? And how can your suffering be equal to mine?" "I am Prometheus," the Titan rasped. "I suffer because I gave humanity fire." "I am Io," she wept, collapsing at the base of the cliff, though the fly forced her instantly to her feet again. "I suffer because Zeus loved me." In a frantic, broken monologue, driven by the madness of the incessant stinging, she told him her story. She had been a priestess, favored by the king of the gods. Zeus desired her and took her. To hide his transgression from his wife, Hera, he transformed Io into a beautiful white heifer. But Hera was not fooled. The queen of the gods demanded the heifer as a gift, and Zeus, trapped, had to agree. Hera set the creature to be guarded by Argus, the giant with 100 eyes. When Hermes, on Zeus's orders, killed Argus, Hera, in her ultimate rage, plucked the gadfly from the deepest pits of the underworld and set it upon Io forever. The fly had driven her across the world, from Greece to the depths of Asia, and now to this desolate peak. Prometheus listened. His agony was static, chained in one place. Hers was kinetic, a torture of constant, maddening motion. He realized the truth. Zeus's tyranny was not just reserved for his enemies. It destroyed everyone it touched, enemy and lover alike. "You are forethought," Io screamed, clutching her head. "You see the future. Tell me, I beg you, tell me what becomes of me. Will this madness ever end? Will I ever rest?" Prometheus, the victim, looked upon the other victim. And for the first time since his chaining, he felt something other than his own pain. He felt pity, and he felt the stirrings of his power. "It will end," Prometheus said, his voice resona, tinged with the certainty of prophecy. "But not soon. You must wander, Io. You will cross continents. You will see nations that do not yet exist. You will carve the map of the world with your suffering. But listen, you will eventually reach the land of the Nile, the great river of Egypt. There, at the delta, Zeus will finally dare to touch you again. He will restore your form, and you will bear his son." Io wept in relief. There was an end. But Prometheus was not finished. "That is your destiny," the Titan continued, "but it is also mine. Pay attention, daughter of the Wanderer. Your suffering is linked to my freedom. For in that land, your bloodline will create a new race of kings. And generations upon generations from now, a hero will be born of your lineage. The greatest hero the world will ever know. And that son of your blood will climb this very rock, and he will be the one who finally sets me free." Prometheus had seen his own salvation. It was a tiny pinpoint of light, millennia away, but it was real. Io stared at him, hopeful. Prometheus looked up at the sky, a new defiance in his eyes. He had one more card to play. "Zeus thinks he is the master of the universe," Prometheus whispered, sharing his greatest secret. "But he is terrified. He overthrew his father, Cronus, and he knows the prophecy, that he too is destined to be overthrown by his own son. A son stronger than himself. I," Prometheus declared, "am the only one who knows the identity of the mother who will bear that son. I know the marriage that will seal his doom. He can chain me here. He can send his eagle. But he will never learn the secret from me. Not until he unbinds me. This is my weapon, Io. My knowledge is my strength." The prophecy was spoken, but the present returned. The divine gadfly, impatient, stung Io with venomous force. She screamed, her sanity shattering again. The compulsion to move seized her. I must go, she shrieked. The madness! It returns. She scrambled away, vanishing down the far side of the mountain, resuming her endless, tormented journey across the world. Prometheus was alone again. He watched her go, a fellow sufferer in the empire of Zeus's cruelty. He looked up. The sun was at its zenith. The shadow was returning. The eagle was descending for its daily meal. But this time, as the talons dug in, Prometheus held onto a new thought. He had seen the future. He knew the prophecy. He knew that one day, far in the future, a hero was coming. He could wait. The cycle of the rock continued. The eagle came. The liver was devoured. The flesh regenerated. But Prometheus was no longer the same victim. The visit from the tormented Io had changed the equation of his suffering. He was no longer just a martyr. He was a strategist, holding the single most valuable piece of intelligence in the cosmos. He knew the prophecy. He knew the name of the woman whom Zeus must never marry. He knew the secret to the tyrant's downfall. He endured the eagle's daily torment, but his mind was sharp. His despair was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. He was no longer just enduring, he was waiting. He had a bargaining chip, and he knew, eventually, the king would have to negotiate. Time passed. How much, he did not know. The eagle departed one evening, leaving him mutilated in the freezing twilight. As his body began the slow, agonizing process of knitting itself back together, a new light appeared. It was not the moon. It was not the organic mist of the sea nymphs. It was a sharp, arrogant flash of gold. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, stood before him. He was not the smiling diplomat who had delivered Pandora, nor the procedural officer who had arrested Prometheus. This Hermes was all business, the arrogant right hand of the king, and his face was twisted in contempt. He looked at the bound Titan, at the blood, at the chains, and he sneered. So, Hermes began, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he circled the rock. This is the great forethought. This is the Titan who would defy the king. You look like butcher's meat, Prometheus. A pathetic warning, hanging at the end of the world. And yet, you are still proud. Prometheus, regenerating, said nothing. He stared at the messenger. The king is busy, Hermes continued, tapping his winged staff impatiently. But your boasts have reached Olympus. The mad cow you entertained. Io, she has been charting your prophecies. This secret you claim to hold. This knowledge of a future marriage. A threat to the king's throne. Hermes leaned in close, his face hard. My father, Zeus, is unimpressed. But he is practical. He values order. Your loose talk is a threat to that order. So he has sent me, his trusted son, to retrieve the information. Consider this, your one chance at redemption. Redemption, Prometheus rasped, the word tasting like ash. That's the offer, Hermes said, pacing. Tell me the secret. Tell me the name of this woman. Give the king the knowledge you claim to possess. In exchange, perhaps he recalls the eagle. Perhaps he shortens your sentence by a few millennia. It's a good deal. Better than you deserve. He gestured at the Titan's open wound. Surely, you are tired of this. Prometheus was silent for a long moment, watching the divine servant. Then, the Titan laughed. It was a dry, terrible, cracking sound. You, Prometheus spat. The errand boy. The servant of the tyrant. You, who delivered the poison Pandora to my brother. You dare come here and speak of deals? I gave your father the strategy he needed to win his war, Prometheus boomed, his voice regaining its ancient power. He paid me with these chains. I gave his creation life, and he paid them with misery. And now he sends his lackey to demand the one piece of knowledge that keeps his own throne safe? Tell the tyrant I said this. I have nothing for him. Hermes lost his composure. Fool! You will defy him still? After this. There are torments you cannot even imagine. There is one price for my secret, Prometheus declared. It is not recalling the eagle. The price is my freedom. Absolute, unconditional, and an apology to humanity. He will pay that price, or I will take this secret with me to the darkness of Tartarus. Now get off my rock. You pollute the air. Hermes was shaking with rage. He had failed his mission. The Titan would not break. You condemn yourself, Titan. Hermes shrieked. You had a chance. You chose the path of pride. You think this is the worst he can do. You think this rock, this wind, this bird, is the end of his wrath. Hermes raised his staff to the sky. Then listen to the sentence you have just passed on yourself. Since you choose the rock, the king will make you one with the rock. He will send a storm that will shatter this mountain. He will bury you, chain and all, in the darkness beneath the earth, where you will lie in silence for an age, deprived even of the sun. And when he finally brings you back up to the light, this eagle will look like a fond pet compared to the new horrors he will invent. Choose. Hermes screamed. The secret or the abyss? Prometheus looked the messenger god dead in the eye. Bring the storm. Hermes roared in frustration. Then suffer. Forever. Your blood is on your own hands. The messenger god vanished in a flash of infuriated light. Prometheus was alone again. He took a single, shuddering breath. He had made his choice. He had refused the bargain. He looked at the sky. The clouds were gathering. But this was no natural storm. The air became electric. The wind stopped. A pressurized, terrible silence fell on the Caucasus. Zeus had heard the refusal. A single bolt of lightning, thicker than the mountain itself, struck the peak. The rock groaned. The foundations of the world shuddered. The cliff face that held Prometheus cracked, split, and collapsed inward. Prometheus, still chained, shouted one last word of defiance as the mountain fell apart, burying him alive, pulling him down into the crushing absolute darkness of the earth, far from the sun, far from the sky, to begin the next phase of his endless punishment. Zeus kept his word. The lightning shattered the peak, and the mountain collapsed. Prometheus, still bound by the unbreakable adamantine chains, was plunged into the earth. This was a new torture. A new eternity. There was no sun. There was no wind. There was no sound save the groan of compressed stone. There was no eagle. There was only the darkness, the crushing weight, and time. This was sensory deprivation, designed to break the mind that physical torture could not. For an age, the Titan of forethought lay buried alive, entombed in the heart of the very world he had sought to save. He was forgotten by the gods above and unknown to the humans below, who were now fighting and dying in the plagues of Pandora. Prometheus had only two things to keep his sanity. The first was his secret, the knowledge of Zeus's eventual downfall. The second was his prophecy, the pinpoint of light he had foreseen in the bloodline of Io. And while the Titan lay paralyzed in the stone, on the bright earth above, mortal history began to turn. Time, which was static for Prometheus, flowed like a river for humanity. And it flowed for Io. Just as Prometheus had prophesied, the tormented wanderer, driven mad by Hera's gadfly, completed her agonizing journey. After crossing continents, she finally stumbled into the fertile, green delta of the land of Egypt. There, by the banks of the great Nile River, Zeus finally intervened. He defied his own wife, calmed Io's madness, and restored her human form. There, she bore his son. Her line endured. Generations passed. Her descendants became kings, warriors, and queens. The blood of the Titan favors ran strong, moving from Egypt back into the lands of Greece. Generations upon generations lived and died. Humanity built cities of bronze, fought wars with the spears Prometheus had taught them to sharpen, and told stories around the fire he had stolen, forgetting the name of their benefactor, crediting the fire instead to the very gods who had forbidden it. And then, after millennia had passed, the prophecy of Prometheus focused. A mortal woman was born into Io's line, Alcmene, a queen of purity and strength. And Zeus, the king of the gods, looked down upon her. Driven by his own nature, the same nature that had doomed Io, Zeus disguised himself as Alcmene's husband and lay with her. From this union, a child was born. He was born half mortal, half god, possessing a strength that the world had never known. He was the culmination of Io's suffering. His name was Hercules. This child, this demigod, was the hero Prometheus had seen in his vision. On Olympus, Zeus watched this new hero grow. He also grew impatient. The secret that Prometheus held, the prophecy of the marriage that would end his reign, still remained untold, buried in the heart of the mountain. Zeus had tried physical torture. He had tried sensory deprivation. But the Titans will remain unbroken. The king of the gods decided it was time to change the venue. With a roar that shook the cosmos, Zeus commanded the fractured Caucasus mountains to move. The earth groaned. The buried strata of rock shifted. The tomb that had held Prometheus for an age splintered, groaned, and was thrust upward, rising, until the shattered peak once again stood exposed against the sky. Prometheus, blinded, gasped as the sun hit his face for the first time in centuries. He was back. Back in the light, back in the wind, still chained, the adamantine spike still embedded in his chest. His return did not mean mercy. It meant the resumption of the old sentence. Zeus had not recalled his sentinel. Prometheus had only a moment to feel the sun before a shadow fell over him. He heard the sound he thought he had escaped. The shriek. The beating of massive wings. The Caucasian eagle had been waiting. It returned, its divine hunger undiminished, and resumed its daily duty. The cycle of agony, regeneration, and despair began anew. Zeus had reset the board. The Titan was back where he started, suffering his daily torment. But the world was no longer the same. Far below, the secret weapon of Prometheus, the child of Io's prophecy, Hercules, was performing his own great labors, unaware that his greatest test, his final destiny, was not to fight a monster, but to defy a god, and to climb this very rock. The hero and the victim were now alive at the same time. Prometheus was back in the light, and back in the agony. The century spent buried alive in the darkness had been a torment of the mind. The return to the peak was the renewal of the torture of the flesh. Zeus had reset the clock. The cycle resumed with brutal precision. Dawn. The sound of wings. The shadow falling across the rock. The arrival of the Caucasian eagle. The hours of invasive visceral violation as the monstrous bird, Zeus's perfect machine of vengeance, performed its duty. Dusk. The regeneration. The freezing cold. The prophecy he had given Io, the vision of a hero born from her bloodline, felt impossibly distant. A flickering candle in an ocean of pain. He had been waiting for millennia. He had endured. But endurance has its limits, even for a god. Far below the peak, the world had changed. The humans Prometheus had saved were now building empires of bronze and iron, fighting wars, and suffering the plagues of Pandora. And among them walked the hero, Hercules, the son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, the final descendant of Io's tormented line. Hercules, cursed by a jealous Hera, was driven by his own fate. He was the world's strongest man, a demigod defined by his suffering and his impossible victories. He was on a quest, serving his labors, seeking redemption for a past he could not control. His journey, his penance, took him to the very edges of the known world, seeking the mythical garden of the Hesperides. His path led him into the uncharted, storm-blasted wilderness of the Caucasus. This land was desolate, feared by all mortals. It was a place the gods had abandoned, save for one. As Hercules climbed higher than any man had ever dared, he began to hear sounds carried on the wind. He heard the predatory shriek of a bird larger than any he had ever known. And beneath it, he heard something else. The sound of a divine, agonizing roar. The sound of suffering. Guided by the screams, Hercules climbed the sheer cliff face, the peak where no life grew. He pulled himself over the final ledge. What he saw stopped his heroic heart. There, pinned against the rock, his arms spread wide, was a figure of immense majesty, ravaged by time and torture. A massive, adamantine spike was driven through his chest, and his body was locked in unbreakable chains. As Hercules watched, stunned into silence, the sun reached its zenith. A shadow fell over the mountain. The air tore apart as the Caucasian eagle descended. It was a monster of dark feathers and divine metal, its eyes burning with the singular command of Zeus. It ignored Hercules completely. Its only purpose was the Titan. The eagle landed on Prometheus's chest, its talons digging into the already scarred flesh. It shrieked in triumph and lowered its beak. Hercules, son of Zeus, looked upon the scene. He had fought the Hydra. He had battled the Nemean lion. This was different. This was not chaos. This was order. This was deliberate, calculated, eternal cruelty. This was the work of his own father. The eagle dipped its head to begin the feast. No! Hercules roared, his voice the sound of a rock slide. The eagle, surprised, looked up. It saw the demigod. Seeing him only as an obstacle to its divine duty, the beast spread its monstrous wings and launched itself from the Titan, diving directly at Hercules, its adamantine beak aimed at his heart. But Hercules was the fastest hero in the world. He was already moving. He dropped his club, drew his massive bow, and nocked an arrow. This was an arrow given to him by Apollo, its tip coated in the deadliest venom in existence, the blood of the Hydra he had slain. The monster was upon him. Hercules fired. The arrow flew true. It struck the eagle dead center in the chest. The beast stopped, suspended in the air. It looked down at the arrow in confusion. For the first time in its eternal existence, it felt something other than hunger. It felt death. The immortal creature, built by the gods, was no match for the poison of the Hydra. The eagle let out one last, gurgling cry. Its divine programming shattered. It twisted in the air, its wings collapsing, and plummeted like a stone into the bottomless canyon below. Silence. For the first time in thousands of years, the peak was silent. The sun was high. The Titan was chained. But the tormentor was gone. Hercules, breathing heavily, turned to the bound god. He approached slowly. Prometheus was weeping. Not in pain but in shock. The daily agony had stopped. He looked at the massive hero approaching him. He saw the face of Zeus, but he saw the eyes of a mortal. He saw the bloodline. "You have come," Prometheus whispered, his voice cracking. I have seen you. In the blood of the Wanderer." Hercules looked at the Titan, confused. "I am Hercules, son of Zeus." "I know who you are," Prometheus said, a new strength entering his voice as his wounds began to close, this time without the promise of being torn open again. "You are the son of Io's line. You are the hero of my prophecy. I am Prometheus, and I have been waiting for you." Silence. For the first time in millennia, the peak of the Caucasus was silent. The daily tormentor, the monstrous eagle, the very sentinel of Zeus's wrath, was gone, a poisoned carcass lying in the abyss below. Prometheus, his body whole, his wounds healing clean, looked at the demigod who stood before him. This hero, born of the very bloodline of the wandering Io whom Prometheus had prophesied, had done the impossible. He had broken the cycle. "You have come," Prometheus whispered again, his voice cracking with emotion. "I am free." "The beast is gone," Hercules said, his voice deep with the gravity of his own labors. "But you are still chained. My task is not finished." Hercules, the strongest being in the world, son of Zeus himself, turned his attention to the bonds. He dropped his bow, gripped the adamantine chain that bound the Titan's right wrist, and pulled. Nothing happened. Hercules frowned. He braced his feet against the mountain itself, calling upon the full measure of his divine strength. He pulled. The muscles in his back and shoulders knotted, straining with a power that could move mountains. The mountain itself groaned. The rock cracked and shifted. But the chains, forged by Hephaestus and sealed by the divine judgment of the king of the gods, did not break. They did not even stretch. They were not just metal, they were a law. "It is useless, hero," Prometheus said, his brief hope turning back to despair. "These are not the chains of mortals. They were forged by a god and sealed by the will of the king. They are absolute. Brute force cannot end this sentence." Hercules stopped, breathing heavily, frustrated. "Then what can? I killed the tormentor. I will not leave the victim." Prometheus looked at the demigod. He saw the strength of Zeus, but he also saw the suffering of Io, the empathy of a man. He could trust him. "My sentence," Prometheus explained, "is eternal. I am an immortal, condemned for high treason. By the oldest laws of the cosmos, the laws even Zeus cannot ignore, my place cannot be made empty. I cannot be freed, unless another immortal willingly takes my place. Another immortal must volunteer to surrender their own divinity, to die, and descend into the darkness of Tartarus in my stead. And what immortal," the Titan asked bitterly, "would choose death just to save me?" Hercules looked away, toward the path he had just traveled. A shadow of pain crossed his own face. He too understood the price of divine mistakes. "There is one," Hercules said quietly. "On my journey here, I passed an old friend, the wisest of all beings, Chiron." Chiron was the great centaur, half man, half horse. But unlike the other savage centaurs, he was immortal, a divine spirit, the teacher of all the great heroes of Greece. He had taught music, medicine, and philosophy, and he was currently in unending agony. Weeks earlier, during one of his labors, Hercules had battled a horde of centaurs and had accidentally wounded his beloved teacher, Chiron, with one of his arrows, an arrow poisoned with the incurable blood of the Hydra. The poison could not kill the immortal centaur, but it also could not be healed. Chiron was trapped, just as Prometheus was, in an eternity of pain, a searing, burning agony that his immortal body could not escape, and his wisdom could not cure. He longed for the peace of death, but his divinity forbade it. "He knows the prophecy," Hercules said. "He knows the cosmic law. He is waiting." As if summoned by the words, a figure appeared, climbing the last ridge. It was Chiron, his noble face pale and twisted in pain, leaning heavily on a staff, his wound weeping venom. The two wisest beings in the world, the teacher of heroes and the savior of man, looked at each other. "Prometheus," Chiron gasped, his voice strained. "I have taught many, but your lesson of sacrifice, was the greatest. You suffer for giving knowledge to the world. I suffer from a fool's mistake. My immortality has become my prison. Your imprisonment is a crime against thought itself." Chiron turned to Hercules. "The law must be satisfied. Let this be my final lesson. Let me make the trade." The centaur looked up at the sky, addressing the god who was surely watching. Zeus, king, I offer the exchange. I, Chiron, immortal son of Cronus, willingly surrender my divinity. I take the place of the Titan. I will descend to Tartarus, as the law requires. Let Prometheus go free. A terrible, cosmic silence fell on the mountain. The air crackled. The trade was offered. A soul for a soul. Then, a subtle shift. The chains on Prometheus's wrists, which had been dark and absolute, suddenly lost their divine sheen. The judgment of Zeus was lifted. The magical seal was broken. The cosmic law was satisfied. All that remained was the metal. Hercules looked at the chains. He smiled. Now, he said, it is just metal. The hero gripped the cuff again. He braced himself. And this time, with a roar that echoed the Titan's own defiance, Hercules pulled. The adamantine, the strongest metal in creation, shattered. The links exploded, flying like shrapnel. Hercules moved to the other wrist. He shattered that chain. He shattered the bonds on the Titan's ankles. All that remained was the great adamantine spike pinning Prometheus to the stone by his chest. Hercules placed his hands on the spike. With a great cry, he ripped the final instrument of torture from the Titan's flesh and hurled it into the abyss, where it joined the eagle. For the first time in 30,000 years, Prometheus was free. He collapsed from the rock, falling into the arms of the demigod hero. Hercules lowered the Titan gently to the ground. Chiron, the centaur, his face softening as his own eternal pain finally began to fade into a mortal numbness, sank to his knees, his journey to the underworld about to begin. Prometheus stood on the earth, weak, scarred, but standing. He was free. And then, the sky above them turned midnight black. The wind stopped. A single, massive thunderclap shook the roof of the world. Zeus had seen it. The prisoner was free. The law had been circumvented. The final negotiation was about to begin. The adamantine chains lay shattered on the rock. Prometheus stood free, leaning heavily on the demigod hero, Hercules. Far below them, the spirit of the noble centaur, Chiron, began its descent into the underworld, his immortal agony finally over, the price for the Titan's freedom paid in full. But the sky above them remained black. The victory was silent, pressurized, and incomplete. They had satisfied the ancient cosmic law of sacrifice, but they had defied the personal, absolute decree of the king. A single bolt of lightning, brighter than 10,000 suns, struck the peak. It did not strike the heroes, it struck the rock beside them, and in the blinding flash, the king of Olympus materialized. Zeus stood before them. He was not the distant, calculating politician on a throne. This was the warrior god who had defeated the Titans, his form crackling with unbound ozone, his eyes holding the fury of 1,000 storms. He looked past Hercules. His gaze locked onto Prometheus. "You are free," Zeus thundered, his voice not a shout, but the sound of the world splitting apart. "You have broken my judgment. You have used loopholes of ancient law against the god of law." He turned his terrible gaze to his own son. "And you, Hercules, my favored child, you dare to raise your hand against my personal sentinel? You dare to unravel the sentence of your own father? This is insurrection." Hercules, who had faced Hades himself, did not flinch. He stepped forward, placing himself between Zeus and the weakened Titan. "Father," Hercules said, his voice resonating with his own divine power, "I have done my labors. I have cleansed the world of monsters that you allowed to roam. But this was not a monster. This was a crime. Your cruelty here shamed the very name of Olympus. I ended a torture. I did not begin a war. You have no right." Zeus roared, raising his hand, the lightning gathering. "Stop!" The voice came from Prometheus. Weak, ragged, but burning with an authority that even Zeus recognized. The Titan pushed himself off the hero and stood on his own feet. "This is not about your son, Zeus," Prometheus said. "This is not about your pride. This has always been about you, and me, and what I know." The lightning in Zeus's hand faded slightly. The standoff was clear. "You can strike us both down," Prometheus challenged. "Send your son to Tartarus with the centaur. Hurl me back into the stone. But if you do, you will die. Not today, but soon. You will fall just as your father Cronus fell, and his father Auranes before him. Because I know the prophecy, and you do not." Checkmate. This was the secret Prometheus had held, the bargaining chip he had earned with millennia of agony. Zeus, the king, the tyrant, was trapped. He hated the Titan more than any being in Thekasomos, but he loved his throne more. "You, boasting traitor," Zeus hissed. "You have been planning this. I am forethought, Prometheus replied. Planning is what I do. You want the secret that saves your throne? Then you will accept my terms. Zeus stared at his enemy, the new reality setting in. The Titan was not the prisoner anymore. He was the only one who held the key. Name them, Zeus growled. My freedom, absolute and unconditional. My honor, restored. And humanity. Humanity. Zeus sneered. The pathetic creatures who used your fire to kill each other? They are what they are, Prometheus said. Flawed, violent, brilliant, and full of hope, thanks to the spirit Pandora left them. They keep the fire. You will never again interfere with their progress. You will let them build their world, free of your tyranny. Accept the bargain, or await your doom. For a long minute, the king of the gods wrestled with his pride. But the fear of the prophecy, the vision of being overthrown just as he had overthrown Cronus, was stronger. He had to know. You have my word, Zeus said, the words tearing from his throat. Freedom, honor, and the mortals are left to their own path. Now, tell me. Prometheus stepped closer to the king. He revealed the secret he had guarded for ages. The sea nymph, Thetis. You desire her. You plan to marry her. Do not. The prophecy declares that her son will be mightier than his father. If you father that child, he will grow to destroy you. But if you marry her to a mortal, the child will be the greatest of mortal heroes, but he will pose no threat to Olympus. Zeus absorbed the information. The path was clear. His throne was safe. He would later arrange for Thetis to marry a mortal king, Peleus, and their son would be Achilles. The tension on the mountain broke. The bargain was struck. The cosmic war was over. Zeus looked at Prometheus. The hate was gone, replaced by a cold, practical exhaustion. The law of Chiron has freed you from death. My bargain has freed you from the chains. But you were sentenced eternally. My word must be law. You cannot simply walk away as if nothing happened. Zeus needed a symbol. He needed to win, technically. He gestured. Hephaestus, who had perhaps been waiting, appeared. Zeus commanded him. The blacksmith god, silent, picked up one shattered link of the adamantine chain. He reforged it, not into a shackle, but into a simple iron ring. Then he took a tiny chip of the Caucasus rock, the very stone Prometheus had been bound to, and set it into the ring like a jewel. Zeus commanded Prometheus to wear it. You were sentenced to be bound to this rock forever, the king declared. You will wear this ring, forged from the chain and the stone, for the rest of eternity. Thus, you will always be bound to the Caucasus. My sentence is fulfilled. It was a symbolic gesture, a legal loophole, a way for the tyrant to save face. Prometheus looked at the ring, then at Zeus. He accepted. He slipped the iron ring onto his finger. He was technically bound, but he was finally, truly free. Hercules, his quest complete, helped the weakened Titan. Together, the hero and the savior began the long walk down the mountain, leaving Zeus alone on the silent, shattered peak. The sky above the shattered Caucasus peak cleared. The unnatural thunder of Zeus's rage faded, replaced by the natural, cold wind of the summit. The bargain was struck. The secret was told. The king's throne was secure. The war between the Titan of forethought and the god of order was finally, truly, over. Hercules, the hero of the prophecy, the son of both Zeus and the line of Io, offered his arm to the Titan he had rescued. Prometheus, scarred, weakened, but standing free for the first time in millennia, accepted. Together, the demigod and the Titan began the long, arduous journey down the mountain, leaving the place of eternal torment behind them. They walked from the desolate wilderness back into the green world. Hercules, his greatest labor now complete, had his own destiny to fulfill, his own path to immortality to walk. The two beings, the hero and the savior, parted ways at the edge of the mortal world, their fates forever intertwined. Prometheus was alone. But this was not the isolation of the rock. This was the freedom of the road. He was an immortal, hardened by the king, yet exiled from Olympus. He was the god who now belonged nowhere. So he returned to the only thing that mattered. He went to find his children. But the world he returned to was not the one he had left. The innocent, shivering tribe he had taught in the cave was gone, lost to time, transformed by the two gifts that had defined their destiny, his fire and Zeus's Pandora. He walked among them, a stranger, his divinity cloaked, his eyes ancient. He saw the world the spirits from the jar had made. He saw humans dying of the diseases he had not known existed. He saw men marked by the gray touch of old age, a spirit he had never met. He walked through marketplaces loud with the sound of greed, and he passed barracks where soldiers sharpened spears, his spears, for the act of war. He saw everything Zeus had predicted. The chaos, the pain, the self-destruction. His sacrifice, he wondered, had it all been for nothing? Had he merely traded the tyranny of the sky for the tyranny of human nature? He walked, unseen, into a city built of brick and wood, loud with the conflict of politics and the bitterness of envy. He felt the cold iron ring on his finger, the reminder of his rock and his chains. He wandered until the sun set. He found himself in a quiet alley, looking into the window of a simple home. Inside, a family was gathering. They were not perfect. The father looked weary from toil. The mother coughed, a victim of the sicknesses loose in the world. But in the center of their room, there was a hearth. And in that hearth, a fire was burning. His fire. The fire pushed back the shadows, just as it had in the first cave. It held the night at bay. The family gathered around it, not just for warmth, but for community. The mother cooked food over the flame, unlocking its nutrients, feeding her children. And Prometheus watched the youngest child, a girl, look into the dancing flames. Her eyes were not hollow with the terror of the dark. They were not blind with the ignorance of an animal. They were bright. They were questioning. They were intelligent. They held the one spirit that Pandora had managed to save, the one force stronger than all the miseries combined. They held hope. The Titan finally understood. Zeus had been wrong. And he, Prometheus, had only been half right. He had stolen the fire wanting to make humanity safe and happy, like the gods. Zeus, in his vengeance, had ensured they would always be miserable. But the combination of the two, the fire of divine thought mixed with the plagues of mortal suffering, had created something new. Something the cosmos had never seen. It created humanity. Humanity was not divine. They were not just animals. They were the struggle between the two. Their greatness was not defined by their power, but by their ability to endure suffering and still create. To feel greed, but sometimes choose charity. To feel fear, but build anyway. To see the darkness of the plagues, but still light the fire of hope. His gift had not failed. It had merely been completed by the malice of his enemy. Prometheus looked down at the simple iron ring on his finger. The piece of stone from the Caucasus gleamed dully in the firelight from the window. Zeus meant this as a shackle, a final, symbolic brand of his imprisonment. But Zeus, lacking forethought, had failed to see the truth. It was not a prisoner's chain. It was a wedding band, a symbol of his unbreakable, eternal bond to the world he had created, the world he had suffered for. It was the mark of his promise, his permanent link to the earth. His trial was over. His work was done. The god who had given fire to humanity turned from the window. He pulled his cloak around his scarred shoulders and vanished into the crowded streets, leaving his children to their destiny, forever watched over, forever carrying his spark in their hearts, and forever wearing his ring as a symbol of their own unbreakable promise to endure.